7 o'clock p.m. Public hearing in the Norfolk Zoning Board of Appeals shall be physically closed to the public to avoid group congregation. Alternative public access to this meeting shall be made utilizing the Zoom virtual meeting software. This software will allow users to view the meeting and send a comment or question to the chair via the raise your hand function, which you'll find in your lower right-hand corner of your computer. The meeting will be recorded for future rebroadcast by the Norfolk Community Television. Please note, to attend the meeting, please sign in using your first and last name. You will not be admitted if you do not. If you wish to ask a question or provide comment, please use the raise your hand feature, and Amy Brady will recognize you. If for some reason you're having difficulty doing that, please just make a comment and we'll recognize you. Tonight we have a couple of public hearings. We will have continue the public hearing for 19 Shire Drive, and we have a comprehensive permit for 144 Seekonk Street. Our 7 o'clock p.m. 112 Myrtle Street variance. They've asked for a continuance, so could I get a motion at this time to continue the public hearing for 112 Myrtle Street variance until August 5th at 7:05 p.m.
So moved.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Second.
Any discussion? I think the applicant is still working with their neighbor, trying to find a path to acquire some property. So I think it's a worthwhile for them to continue that. So any further discussion? All those in favor of continuing the public hearing to August 5th at 7:05 p.m.?
Aye.
Aye.
Don?
Aye.
Okay. Tim?
Aye.
Josie?
Aye.
Okay, great. And so that was, I think it was Dawn. I think Joe motion and Dawn seconded.
Yep, said it.
All right, it is 7:05 p.m. We're right on track, and now we're going to continue the public hearing for 19 Shire Drive special permit. Jim Souza, welcome back again. How are you?
Good.
Do you want to give us an update to where you are?
Okay, basically at the last meeting, there was a question as to what the use of the property was. I got an email from Rich McCarthy on June 15th referencing a meeting with him, Mr. Bullock, Mr. Byron, and Mr. Wider, where they came up with the use to be a contractor's headquarters. That was presented to the planning board at our last meeting with the planning board, and nobody had an exception to that. So I sent in a revised application to Amy with the use being the contractor's headquarters.
I think what you're looking for from the zoning board is to allow outdoor storage of more than 3 commercial vehicles limited to the rear lot. Is that correct, Jim?
Yes.
All right. And Jim, can you identify for us what type of vehicles? I think on your plan you show some vehicles. What are you looking for commercial vehicles in your lot? Numbers?
I believe there's going to be one front end loader to maintain the stockpiles, a couple of farm tractors, for lack of a better term, that they use for the construction of the sports fields that they do, a couple of tag trailers, and I believe 1 or 2 dump trucks. They were all listed on that sheet, and the parking spots where they're going to be parked were labeled.
Right. I came up with, I think 1, 2, 3. What is it? What is a tag vehicle? Is that just a trailer?
It's a trailer, yeah.
Okay. I came up with about 9. Is that correct?
I believe so.
Okay, and they'll all be, I mean, according to Bob Bullock, a commercial vehicle would have to be something that has a registration. Is that what you're referring to?
They are all,
have a
I believe
registration?
they're all registered.
Okay, so you're looking for basically 9 commercial vehicles allowed to park in the rear of the lot.
Correct.
Okay, I'll open it up to questions from the board. I'll start with Mike.
Pretty straightforward as far as I'm concerned.
Okay, Joe?
with the clarifications we're getting tonight, it's pretty straightforward. I agree. And if those 9 vehicles are detailed and shown appropriately in the plan, I'm all set.
Okay, Don?
Yeah, I'm comfortable with it. I would not want to limit it just till 9 though, okay? In other words, I guess I would ask the applicant if we were to say 10 or less, does that meet?
10 or less would be fine with us.
Okay, I would recommend that we not, things can change over the next few years. And I don't want to force the applicant to come back and say, gee, I need another space.
No, good point, Don. Josie
I agree, it's straightforward.
and Tim.
I agree, and I also agree with Dawn's suggestion. We can make it 10 or less. It might prevent some confusion down the road.
Okay, great. All right, nope, I think the planning board is planning on deliberating this on July 14th with regard to your site plan approval and your and whether or not contractor headquarters is acceptable, but from our perspective, yes, limiting it to 10 or less commercial vehicles in the rear lot works out. All right, any other questions? Anybody in the public, Amy, that has any questions with regard to Shire Drive and the permit that's being requested? Amy?
I'm scanning down the list here and seeing no hands. I see
Okay.
no hands.
Great. All right, could I have a motion to close the public hearing for A&A and J&B Realty for a special permit, section J7A 2B, for a special permit to allow outdoor storage of more than 3 commercial vehicles limited to the rear lot?
So moved.
We have a second.
Second.
Do we have any further discussion with regard to this? Don't think we do. Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great. Okay. Jim, I don't know. We'll try to get to this tonight. If we don't, we will certainly deliberate at our next meeting, okay? I know you're
I
going before,
appreciate
you're going before the 14th, so I think we got a little bit of time here, but we'll see what we can do, okay?
Alrighty.
It may get moved to the meeting, may get me to the meeting of the 22nd. Sorry it's taken so long, but I'm happy we finally got some clarification.
Okay,
All right. Amy, 3 minutes before our public hearing for 144 Seekonk Street, is that correct?
Yep.
Okay. And we have, is that right?
No, I'm sorry, that broke up, Chris.
I don't think we have any minutes to approve.
No, we do not.
We do not?
We do not. It's been a long
Okay.
week today.
Okay. All right. So we've got 3 minutes, so we'll wait and then we'll start 144 Seekonk Street at 7:15. Good evening, Shawn. How are you?
I'm great. How about everybody else?
We're doing well. We're doing
Awesome.
well.
Thank you for asking.
Boy, you made a
Good job.
comment about my Coke bottle. You didn't make a comment about Shawn's court.
I know Shawn better than that. See?
Yeah,
As,
my name's Irish, my liver's not.
has UMass come up with a plan for the fall yet, Shawn?
Yeah, actually, Travis just found out the kids can go back, can stay at school, but the only in-person classes that they're gonna have are like labs and things like that. So he's actually thinking about staying home for the semester and just doing the classes from here.
Really?
Yeah, which I think is, pretty good. I was a little anxious about him leaving the house, so yeah, get one more half a year.
Yeah. So they're gonna allow him to do classes from home, huh?
Yeah. So all of his classes will be online.
No kidding.
I made the mistake of telling him I only went to about 10% of my classes my first year anyway, so.
Great. They charge the same amount though, don't they?
I don't know. That's what I'm curious to find out.
Ah,
I don't know how they could if there's no room and board, right? But we'll see.
who knows, right?
I'm still basking in the decision, just him going to UMass instead of somewhere else was just took the stress level way down for me.
Yes.
And Mike, he will be skiing for UMass.
Oh, he will.
Yeah.
Very
Actually,
good.
one of his other
He
friends,
will be,
yeah, two of his other friends, one who's one of the best female skiers in the state are going there as well.
really? Oh,
Yeah.
good.
That's going to boost their program up.
Yeah, they're still, it's a club program because they couldn't keep their D1 status because they couldn't keep their Nordic team. So,
Why couldn't they keep the Nordic team?
well, in order to be D1, you have to have a Nordic team and an Alpine team.
There weren't enough kids for the Nordic team?
I don't think so, or maybe not enough snow.
Oh, I can apply. I used to jump and run cross country back in the day. And do downhill and slalom.
Those
There you
were
go.
the days. Oh, yes, those were the days.
Okay, Commander Bragg, Kaliza. Yeah, all right. Sure you were. All right, it is now 7:15 and we're going to continue the public hearing for 144 Seekonk Street. Amy, is everybody in the room? I see Dan, I see Chris. Is Ted O'Hart with us as well? Amy?
The man of the hour. I don't see Ted logged in yet.
We don't see Ted yet. We need him here. As much as you're
Kind of
capable,
important, huh?
Chris, we want. Amy, is Ted in?
He said he was
I
going to
know
walk
Al-
the site one more time to see if he could squeeze 120
There he is.
units on there. but-
I just admitted it.
I know Al Quaglieri would like to form on this hearing, but I don't think we can let him, right?
There we go.
Is Ted in?
He's here, but he's muted.
Okay. All right. We will continue the public hearing for 144 Seekonk Street. At this time, I would move it over to Chris Gagino, the attorney for the applicant, Ted O'Hart. And then if Chris, after you,
Oh, sorry, Mr. Chairman. I think we lost you there, but
Yeah.
go
I
through.
assume you.
Yep, turning it over to you, Chris, okay?
Okay.
Make your
Thank you
opening
very
remarks.
much.
Okay.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If everyone recalls, when we were last before the board, we were engaged in the tedious process of reviewing the local bylaw and the applicant's waiver requests to determine what waivers were appropriate to allow what is the revised approved 44 unit plan to move forward at a preliminary level, subject to final plans as described in the comprehensive permit. So in large part, that's an exercise that council can handle along with the engineers just to confirm which waivers are appropriate and which waivers aren't. So since the last hearing, Attorney Hill and I have gone through the waiver request list and the results of the discussion that we had with the board at the last hearing regarding some of the waivers and have narrowed the quote unquote open issues that we can present to the board for discussion this evening to hopefully wrap up the waivers that we're asking the board to grant if the board is inclined to grant those waivers. And then once we zero in on what the waiver list looks like, we can shift to the draft comprehensive permit that again, we have discussed during this hearing. But the applicant's counsel, myself and Dan Hill have gotten together and gone through that in detail as well to see whether or not there are any open issues that we can present to the board for its consideration. And then hopefully this evening, if we're able to close out any of those remaining open issues as far as what the applicant is requesting in connection with its application and request to go forward with the project and what the board's willing to grant, then hopefully we can present the question to the board for a vote as to whether or not they're inclined to grant the permit subject to conditions that ultimately will be presented to the board for signature, but that town council and I can hopefully button up between council as far as whatever the discussion is this evening. So I think that's the map for tonight, hopefully. With that, I can turn it over to Attorney Hill, and maybe he can just clarify whether or not there was anything else we wanted to address this evening. But otherwise, I think we're pretty close to wrapping things up as far as what the applicant is requesting in terms of that 44 unit plan that we've discussed over the last few hearings.
I'll turn it over to you.
Chris, you are fading out. Did you want me to speak?
Yes.
Okay, so Amy, can you share, or can I just take over the screen by pressing share screen?
I think you can. Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna try it.
And it's working.
Okay. All right, so this is the current waiver list. The thought tonight was to go through the list line by line and stopping at any of the open issues. If any board member wants to interrupt and talk about any specific line item, just jump in and interrupt me. If I don't hear from anybody, I'm gonna just scroll until we get to redlined edits that were made within the last week, which illustrate typically some open or outstanding issues that the board needs to make a decision on. So this will look familiar. It's in the same format as we're using for the 194 Main Street project, as well as the Abbeville project. The format, as you can see here, is the first column is the bylaw citation. The next column is the title of the bylaw, the description, what the bylaw requires, and what the waiver decision would be by the board if they choose to make a decision on it. So again, I'm going to skip over sections where I think we already have an agreement or a non-controversial. The first one with some red is the Wetland Regulations. The applicant has asked for a waiver from the Wetland Regulations, except for Section 9, which governs peer review. So when the Conservation Commission holds a hearing on the notice of intent application, which it will, because this project is still subject to state laws, including the State Wetland Protection Act. When the commission opens its hearing, it has the ability to hire a independent peer review consultant, just like we do. So that is preserved under Section 9, and Section 14 regulates what kind of documents the developer needs to submit, which typically includes, plan details and things like that. So the proposal here is to grant the waiver except for these two sections. And then I put some language here clarifying that the project must still pay for the fees for the commission's review under the state act, not the bylaw. Okay. Again, if anyone has a question or an issue, just jump in. Otherwise, I'll keep moving. The next section, street lighting. This is a requirement that an applicant front some money for the cost of electricity for streetlights. And this actually raised a question in my mind, unrelated to the waiver, as to whether we want to have any kind of public street lighting within the development. And this is a unique case because I think this is the first 40B project, at least I've been involved with, where the road is going to be an accepted public way in Norfolk. So I don't know if anyone wants to discuss whether it's advisable to have streetlights within the project. Did we? I'm not even sure if we've asked the DPW about this, and I don't know what the standard practice is for subdivisions in Norfolk.
I mean, it would be good to have streetlights on a public road at the right points.
I
So
think,
when-
It would, I would certainly hope there's going to be a streetlight at the intersection with Seekonk.
Yes, there is.
there already is done. Yeah.
Okay.
Right. And there's at least another point where the roads loop around or cross. Usually, I know in town, we like to make sure we have lights at intersections. Any dangerous curves or, you know, serious curves or terrain changes are important for that look ahead when you're traveling the roads. That's usually the way we do it outside of these type of developments.
I believe the way it's being handled with Enclave is that I think the developer is proposing to put lamp posts in the project, and those lamp posts would be maintained and paid for by the common homeowner association. That would provide lighting for that development. But you know, here there's not going to be a homeowner association. It's going to be a public road, and so it might be difficult to maintain lamp posts. The question is, do you really want, you know, big street lights? Maybe there's something in between that's more residential in flavor. Maybe some gas lamps like on Beacon Hill.
You know, I
if-
just in building on what Joe said, the only intersection in the entire development is that intersection of the upper loop. And I don't know what the developer is looking to do to make sure that intersection is lit. I would agree that putting up a big street light, given the proximity of the houses to the intersection, et cetera, might be somewhat offensive to the two houses that are right on the intersection. But I don't know how the lamppost lighting is going to, you know, help that, because there's definitely I assume there's going to be a stop sign as you come around the loop in order to make a left to go out onto Seekonk Street. So I guess I'm going to throw that back at the developer and ask Ed what his thoughts were.
Yeah, if I, before you do, I just like to qualify my remarks. Dan, I'm sorry, I got confused because I thought this was the project where we had the lights in front of the houses. So I do think that you're going to need street lights out here, particularly at the crosswalks. So there should be a street light at least where there are crosswalks.
Right. And I'll just add, this is Joe, I'll just add that maybe we need a DPW input here, but basically, if these were public roads and I compare them to other roads that might have these type of curves and bends, we usually try, if we go after the fact before lighting was better thought upon, we try to make sure an intersection, possibly crosswalks, of course, and any specific curves or very serious terrain changes amongst the property. You want to have that's where the critical lighting points are. Doesn't have to be too big of a light, but you want to have that look ahead if you know the terrain's going to change. I'll just use like there's some streets here in town where you go down some of these streets, it's not the intersection, it might be because there's a big bend in the road, which this property does show big bends in the road. So maybe a DPW input on where they should go?
Yeah, that's fine, Mr. Chairman. We will consult with the DPW and we'll follow their recommendations on this. And myself, I had figured at the intersection where we turn on from the single road to the loop, at the bus shelter and at the entrance, the 3 points where we were fairly certain we were going to have some kind of lighting.
Shawn, do you think we can make that subject to the final plan after review with the DPW?
Yeah, I think so. Is there a particular spacing requirement in the regulation? Ted, do you know?
No, not offhand, but we can find that out over the next couple of
I don't think there is, Shawn. We've actually, the town has actually been taking out streetlights because they're finding we're actually creating an airport-like effect. So they've actually shut off streetlights.
I agree. That's what I'd like to avoid as well too, but I also don't want to be hamstrung when it comes to, you know, putting a couple extra in. So so it sounds like we're not going to waive this requirement other than what exactly are we trying to consider waiving?
Excuse me if I could just interrupt for 1 second. There is actually going to be some kind of an organization or an association that's maintaining the common areas, cutting the grass, snow plowing, stuff like that on the condominium, and they could also take care of the lights as well. So there don't have to be massive street lights up on poles. There could be smaller, more attractive lights for this kind of development.
So Dan, do you think we can get a hold, we can present this to DPW and make it subject to the final plan?
Yeah, that's fine, as long as the applicant is okay with, at that post-permit condition. We can talk to DPW over the next couple weeks and get clarification. This provision, I think, was just limited to whether the applicant has to pay for 300 months of electricity in advance. That's a general bylaw. It's not the subdivision regulations. The subdivision regulations probably have a provision requiring streetlights, and I don't remember seeing that. And we can, as we go through this, we'll flag it. So,
Ted, are you okay with that?
Yeah, no, that's fine. Yeah, there's some points that definitely going to require lights.
Yeah. Okay. All right, Dan.
all right, we'll move on. Let's see, stormwater, temporary signs. We'll get to a permanent sign in a minute. Driveway permits. Now we're in the zoning bylaw. These are just standard requirements governing what uses are allowed in the district. Watershed protection district, if applicable, it's waived. Same thing with the aquifer protection district. If it's applicable, it's waived. I'll clean up this formatting before we finalize the decision. Floodplain intensity regulations, those are waived. Now we get to the dimensional regulations. And so this is what's required in the R3, the minimum lot size, the minimum frontage, etc. So what the applicant is proposing is that these would be the new minimum standards for the project. And where my cursor is, the minimum lot size would be 7,500 square feet. The minimum frontage on the road is 80. The circle required is waived. And then the setbacks would be 20 in the front and 10 on the side and 20 in the rear. So I believe Shawn has looked at this and was comfortable with these dimensional requirements. Oh, we also have maximum lot coverage, no footprint exceeding 5,000 square feet, which is pretty large, and then maximum building height of 2 stories.
Okay.
So everyone's comfortable with those dimensional requirements?
Dan, the
Yes.
only question I have is, are we clear that the definition of stories doesn't include dormers?
Well, does the 38 feet cover like dormers? It should. The 38 feet. Maybe we should remove the 2 stories and just leave it 38 feet, because there will be dormers in some of the houses.
Okay. So just 38 feet, but it's 38 feet as that's defined in the bylaw. And so I don't know what it is offhand. I'm assuming you guys have looked at that and are comfortable with that dimension.
Yeah, we're comfortable with that, Dan.
Okay.
Hey, Chris, I'd be very careful though, because if the definition is average grade and you've got walkouts, you want to be real careful with that.
Yeah, I believe it's foundation, not average grade, but I'll take a look. I think for purposes of this hearing, and this is, one of those things that council and the engineer can confirm, as long as the board understands, and I believe we've circulated the schematic plans for the single family houses, it's generally 2 stories with the dormers. And then to the extent the land slopes off in the back, there's a walkout in the back. So I believe, everyone's on the same page regarding the design. So I think the 38 feet without more at this point is fine. And then we'll just confirm what's necessary to allow for that.
Okay.
Okay, now we're just moving on to additional lot width and setback requirements. And we're waiving these requirements to allow the configuration as shown on the approved plans. The approved plans, by the way, there's a definition here. The approved plans is the conceptual plan that was submitted on March 30th, I believe, which is the one I just popped up on my screen. It's this plan. All right, so moving along. Section E. We're waiving these subject to the conditions in the permit. Section F9 governs signs. So this was discussed today amongst myself and the applicant, and I discussed this with the chair. So we think actually the best solution here on the sign is that we would agree to waive the dimensional requirement, because the bylaw prohibits a sign that exceeds 8 square feet, which is pretty small, and we can certainly have a tasteful sign that's bigger. And in fact, there are plenty of examples. So we thought it's okay to waive the dimensional requirement, but not to waive this bylaw wholesale, and instead ask the applicant to come back with a specific proposal for a sign that the board would then review and approve. So the language would be that the dimensional requirements waived, provided that the final design and specifications for the proposed sign shall be subject to the board's approval. The applicant shall submit a design proposal to the board prior to the completion of the project, and the board shall render a decision within 30 days.
That language is fine, Dan.
Board's okay?
Yep.
Section G, preconditions to building permit. And we're waiving this only to the extent that the bylaw requires buildings to comply with the zoning bylaw, where we waive those in this case. Same thing with occupancy permits. This is the same language that we're using in the 2 other 40B projects that are currently before us. And I believe that prior projects as well. Now we're moving on to the subdivision rules and regulations, and we applied these rules to 40B projects, even though this is not technically a subdivision, because there's not subdivision approval being granted, but we applied them because this is, for all practical purposes, a subdivision with a road and lots, and these regulations contain a lot of design standards that would appropriately be applied to a project like this. So the first sections of the subdivision regs deal with what's required for submittal, traffic impact analysis, impact studies. So we waive these because we've already reviewed those issues. Same thing with what's required on plans, water courses and trees. We've waived that. Tree removal, that requires the marking of any trees to be removed in the right of way. We waive that here, but we do have a condition F2 in the decision that regulates the removal of vegetation within Seekonk Street as it applies to the site distance issue. Section 4.13, this governs water connections, and I wasn't clear as to what the applicant needed for a waiver. So Chris Agostino, do you want to explain this?
Yeah, Dan, I believe I sent you a follow-up shortly before the hearing, because we got some of these final notes this afternoon. But that section talks about the specific location of fire hydrants. And, frankly, I think I could refer to Shawn just to see whether or not Shawn thinks that's what you generally see. We haven't had a chance to consult with our engineer on it, but it was that second paragraph of that section, Dan, regarding the locations of fire hydrants. And I think the other issue is that there is language in the permit regarding the location of fire hydrants in the discretion of the fire chief. So our thought was waive this and then just refer to the permit. But I'd like to hear what Shawn has to say and, whether or not you're okay relying on the language in the permit.
Yeah, I'm a little confused, same as Dan is, because in the description, it says all building structures and hydrants must be connected to town water system. I understand that's what you're planning on doing, so I was confused by why we would waive that.
I'll read it for you, Shawn. It's the second half of that section. So the first section's fine, okay?
Yeah.
And yeah, if you want to clarify, we don't need that waived. I mean, obviously, it's going to be connected to town water. It says, proposed valves shall be located so that they line up with the edge of traveled way, gutter line, or street line. I don't know where we're going to set the proposed valves. They could be in the sidewalk, they could be in the front yard. Where you're dealing with a 40B project, it's a little tighter. So that was one sentence. The next sentence is okay. It says the existing nearest hydrant shall be located on the plan. It already is. I was fixated on that fire hydrant during the traffic discussion, so we all know where that hydrant is. But the last sentence says, hydrants shall be located at all low points, and hydrants or manual air release valves shall be located at all high points of the proposed water mains. And again, that's a technical issue that I'm unclear with whether or not, we can comply with that at this point. Frankly, from the board's perspective, I'll defer to Shawn, and we might just be able to have that discussion offline. If we don't need to have that waived, it's a technical question.
Yeah, it's not something that I'd recommend waiving, Chris, because these are consistency issues with everything else in the infrastructure. So if this is something that's going to be accepted by the town, I would want everything to be consistent with everything else in town.
So for purposes of this, Dan, let me just look at that. I think we're probably okay on that. And, as noted, and as we discussed, if something like this were to create a major problem, we could always come back before the board, just to go through it. And frankly, I think the reviewing engineer has some discretion there as well to say that it's minor, a minor modification. So I think we're okay leaving this alone at this point based on what Shawn just described.
Yeah, and Chris, on that, what's always awkward for me would be waiving something without justification and without it being a specific thing, particularly design standard. So what I want to do is if there is a reason for, if something's particularly problematic, let's just put it out there, say, can we get some relief from this? We run it by the town, we give our opinion, and if we make a recommendation to the board that it's okay, I would imagine that they'll be receptive.
Yeah, and chances are we'll probably consult with the fire chief as well. And if the fire chief wants it in a certain place, that's probably where we're going to end up putting it. So I think we should be fine just leaving this alone then.
Okay, good.
So Dan, to treat it, why don't we just withdraw the waiver request then on 4.13 and just delete it so it's not referenced as denied or anything?
All right, sounds good. Okay, the next one. So now we get into section 4.14, and this section has a bunch of different subsections, as you can see here. This whole section deals with various road design standards, including widths and depths of the road, pavement, and rights of way, the radii. General alignment of the streets. So we actually don't need this first one, and this, I'm just taking this out because it actually doesn't, there is no section 4.0. So we start right with 14.1, which is the arrangement, general road layout, maximum length of a straight segment shall be 500 feet. Street layouts shall provide for extensions onto adjoining land. So we're waiving that, and we actually don't want there to be extensions onto adjoining lands, so we're waiving that to prohibit them. The next one is 14.2, and this requirement prohibits offsets between intersections of less than 350 feet. It also requires 2 points of access for any subdivision of 25 or more lots, which was one of the issues that we had early on in this project. So we would need to waive this to allow the one point of access, that being the main driveway to Seekonk Street. But I don't think there's anything else that the applicant needs a waiver from. There are no offsets within 350 feet, as far as I can tell. So I just limited this waiver to the access issue.
Yeah, there's only one intersection, so that wouldn't apply.
Chris, are you okay with this?
Yep, that's fine. And
Next.
just, yeah, go ahead, Dan, sorry.
So 14.3, this is a kind of catch-all that requires remedial measures to be taken to improve traffic safety. We actually have conditions in the permit that address this, so this is waived, subject to the conditions set forth in the decision. Street jogs, this is a request to waive this, but I'm not sure you even need it because I don't think there are any street jogs as defined in the regs. And this kind of goes to a broader point that I had with many of these. And I think the best approach on a lot of these very specific design criteria is to deal with these waiver requests as needed. And at this point, the applicant hasn't done their final design yet, which is what we anticipated, because the board essentially agreed to postpone review of the final design until after the permit's been issued. So the applicant doesn't necessarily know what they need or what they don't need because they haven't fully or finally designed the intricate details of the roadway. So I think my recommendation is to pass over many of these requests until the permit's been issued and the applicant has prepared their final design set. And just as a refresher to the board members, what we've agreed to do here is to issue a comprehensive permit subject to a review, a very in-depth review by Shawn of a final plan set that's forthcoming. But that's going to be coming after the permit's been issued. And the applicant has agreed to that in exchange for getting the permit faster than he would otherwise. So we're issuing a permit more quickly, but the applicant has agreed to subject himself to a more in-depth review after the permit has been issued. And so again, my suggestion is that we defer these waiver requests until that time.
So if I could just quickly follow up on that, just to add a little gloss, originally we had asked for a waiver of this entire section 14.4. And when Dan described his position as he just did, I said, all right, well, let's take a closer look at what 14.4 includes. So I actually went line by line in 4.14 and pulled out each specific section to see whether or not we needed a waiver, just looking at the preliminary plan. And, we've already identified a few here that require a waiver, like the one Dan identified about through streets and whatnot. There are a few additional ones that require waivers as well, based on what the plan currently looks like and what we will have to do. For instance, reverse curves. I can see a reverse curve on this plan that is going to require a waiver. Things like maximum grades could be approved at this point. We know the right-of-way width. We know the road width. So, I think we can identify as council and the engineer, which ones are obvious based on this plan, rather than say, well, let's just reserve the whole thing and come back later. I'm willing to do that on the ones that we don't know, but that we don't know whether or not we actually need a waiver at this point. But I did take the time to break this out and identify each one. So I figure maybe we could just go through them quickly and say, okay, yes, that makes sense, and then move on. And if one needs to be reserved, then we're fine reserving it. And, I'll just note for the record, that there is language in the permit that if we require a waiver later on, it can be handled administratively as a minor modification. So it's not the end of the world and we don't need to take up the board's valuable time in the future. But to the extent we can take care of these now, let's take care of them now.
Okay, so I think we're in agreement on that. I just, as I went through these, there were several that I just didn't understand why you were asking for them. So I guess on the street jog issue, just to take 2 seconds, let me just pull up the plan. You know, a street jog is the way it's
Yeah, Dan, we
defined-
don't need that one, so delete that one.
Oh, you don't-
You know, Dan, why don't we have, Chris, why don't you go through them
Yeah,
one by
let's
one?
just go through it. So
let's go
street
through 'em.
jogs,
Let's-
street jogs we don't need.
Which one are you starting with, Chris?
I'm on 14.14.5, reverse curves.
Mhm.
So we need a reverse curve. If you look at the 44 unit plan, I don't know if Amy can bring it up. It appears as though what would be described as a reverse curve is on the west side of the site there, near that bottom wetland where the hand is currently. I think that is a reverse curve. Shawn, correct me if I'm mistaken. But
Yeah, there are several reverse curves, but you know, I have no problem waiving that, provided that, you know, there's a review of the alignment by us at the end.
so yeah, just so you know, Shawn, Dan crafted what I would refer to as a crafty permit, and he's got all sorts of language for you, to suggest things that you feel as though are substantially
Yeah.
better as far as the design. So if something is amiss, then you still have the tools in the permit. So waiving this does not put you at, necessarily at a disadvantage to say that there's something dangerous that you're concerned about. So I think we
Chris,
can.
do you know, is there a specific definition in the regs for reverse curve?
Well, let's be clear as to what the reg says. The reg doesn't prohibit them. It says that reverse curves may be separated by a straight section of road of at least 150 feet in length. So I think the regulation just.
They wouldn't be reverse curves. So if they're separated by a straight section, they're not reverse curves. We'll figure this one out. I have no problem that we'll come up with a safe roadway. So, but there are vertical and horizontal considerations that right now I'm fine waiving the no reverse curves requirement, provided that we'll be able to review both the vertical and horizontal alignment when we're done.
Yeah, and that's subsumed within your review. So I think part of the concern is, we're all dealing, we've been intimately involved with this project and the plans, and we're all on the same page as far as what we're trying to accomplish. Faces can change, and we don't necessarily know exactly who we're going to be dealing with, down the road when we're actually trying to get this thing built. And
Agreed.
These unwaived regulations can cause problems. So I think the goal being to move forward with this, hopefully, this reverse curves should be waived.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
So then the next one, roadway width.
Yeah. Well, it's more than width. This section includes radii, and you didn't say anything about radii in here. So.
Well, what I said was, in the language I had provided, radii. All right, well, where do you see the radii requirement? This minimum curved radius at intersection. All right, so what I figured to solve this with is that we're going to be putting the auto turn software on, or the turning software, to make sure that the largest apparatus that Norfolk owns is able to navigate the radii. So I figured a waiver of this, and so long as it's consistent with what we're showing before you, I mean, you can see on this 44 unit plan, generally what we're showing for roadway layout and road radii. So if this isn't waived, there are clearly provisions in, or there are clearly radii shown on here that might not comply. So I figure you see the plan before you, let's just waive this, and then to the extent there's a detail, it will be worked out in that final plan review.
Yeah, I think this is a good example, though, of a provision that we should defer, because this table of dimensional requirements is a pretty important section of the subdivision regs. and where you're proposing to have the town accept this as a public way, I think the recommendation would be for the applicant to strive to comply as much as possible with these requirements. I mean, we already know, we've already agreed to waive the width of the road down to 24 feet, the right of way down to 40 feet. The grade is no more than 10, that's fine. But these other ones, rather than just waiving them, I think the better course would be to see what you really need and try to comply with the requirements.
Chris, and here's why, because usually when we're waiving like dimensional requirements or things like that, that's not a problem. In this case, we're talking about waiving design standards, and typically when you waive design standards, you usually need a justification for it. So in this case, with the lack of any real final design or any clear justification, it's awkward waiving design standards. I'm perfectly comfortable taking them on a case-by-case basis in the end and being reasonable, but to waive it unilaterally and completely is kind of tough because there's really no basis for it.
Yeah, and I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting that the 44 unit plan, there's enough on there to see that certain things need to be waived. So if the answer is at this point, we agree that the width can be agreed to. What about maximum grade?
I think we're
I
at
think
10%, right?
It's in at 10%.
Shawn, I think,
Yeah, the maximum grade's already noted at 10%.
Yep, that's fine.
All right, so if we agree on the width and the maximum grade, and those are, waived from 14.6, then we can revisit some of these other issues. Like for instance, Dan, the site distance calculations in this, I mean, that part should be waived.
No, actually not, Chris, because you've got aggressive vertical grading. So we got to make sure you have the properly designed crowns so that you have site distances. So you still have site distance issues within a subdivision if the vertical geometry doesn't work well.
There's a separate section on vertical alignment. That's 14.8. I believe that's the one further down. All changes in grade shall be connected by vertical curves of sufficient length to afford adequate site distances. And there's a calculation down there. So this one I looked at as right-of-way widths and road alignments. This isn't a vertical, I understand you're concerned about, vertical site distances.
So why are we waiving site distances then if it doesn't apply?
No, it applies for, I suppose, is there anything in here that's going to violate a site distance requirement? If we're coming around the bend at that corner.
Chris, Ted, I really think, it sounds like this is something we really should defer to get the final plans. I think, the board can handle it administratively with the engineer. And I think you're actually going to box yourself in. And I think you're actually better off not asking for this waiver and allowing it to go to the final site plan. And then it can be handled administratively with Shawn.
I agree, Mr. Chairman.
Then we're only dealing with specific issues and we've got the justification and we've got the answer right in front of us. We know the extent to what we're waiving and the justification for it.
That's perfect. We have the road width determined. That's fine.
I think, so I think we should do that, Dan, and just defer till we get our final and then Shawn can review it. Maybe we can handle it administratively.
Okay. Dan, to the extent you saw any other obvious ones in the ones that I pulled out, I suppose preserve the obvious ones and then, ones that are a little more discreet, we'll just defer.
Okay, well, we can just run through these because there's not that many of them. This issue here, the no intersection shall be as all intersections shall be as close to 90 degrees as possible. You only have one intersection and it's a 90-degree angle. So do you actually need this?
Again, I went through them with the intent of just pulling them out and making sure that, we looked at each one individually. If the answer is we don't need that for that one intersection, then we're okay. And I think, the language there is discretionary anyway.
Right. And the same issue, if you decide for some reason the geometry changes, you can come back and ask for this waiver.
Yep.
it's justified. So I would take that out. Okay. Turning radii at intersections. And my comment here was, do we actually need this waiver? It seemed to me that you have enough frontage to provide the turning radii that's required. So
Yeah, and
That's
again,
one,
if you can't meet it, we'd like it to be in a location that requires justification.
well, and they did move their intersection in order to provide maximum site distance. So if doing that requires a waiver from radii, then that might be justified. But I think this is another one that should be deferred until
yeah.
you know
Why
exactly
don't
what the
why don't
radii.
you defer that one, Dan? Because that's just, you know, we will do the turning analysis when we get there.
Now, site distance for intersections, this is one that I felt comfortable waiving because we went through this already, and we have conditions governing this issue. So,
Yep.
board, Shawn, is everyone okay with this?
Yes.
Vertical alignment. Now, I actually had this as waived, but based upon what Shawn was saying, maybe this is something, again, that should be deferred. If you don't know yet whether or not you need this, we certainly don't want to.
Based on what Shawn said, we should just withdraw that one and
You
defer.
definitely need that. And here's why, Chris, you know, for example.
No, I understand. Yeah, I'm with you, Shawn. I hear you.
Well, I'm also saying is if I would consider a valid reason for adjusting vertical geometry to reduce cuts and fills. So,
Right.
you know, if that's
Right.
the swap, and that's certainly justified.
Okay.
Okay. Cul-de-sac design. You don't have a dead end here, right? So I don't think this is required.
I read it generally. You know, I'm not sure what the definition is locally as far as dead ends. Some towns would actually define this as a dead end, but if you don't think we need it, that's fine. And there aren't any cul-de-sacs, as you pointed out.
There's no dead. There's not even any stubs. I mean,
Right.
This is a
Yep.
perfect loop. So
The Dan Hill Loop.
I want a plaque out there.
Yeah.
All right.
And it can be bigger than 8 feet.
All right, local site distance requirements. Actually, let me look at this because I thought this was limited to the intersection site distances, but it might be broader. It's
I read it as intersection site distances, so I thought.
1410 dash.
Yeah. Yeah, so Dan, we already, you know, did the whole site distance analysis at the entrance there, so I think that should be covered.
Well, you asked for 10 through 14. 10 is actually not site distance. That's.
I don't think we need 10, so you can take
Yeah.
10 out if you don't want to list it, but
I think
11 and 12.
I think it's 11 and 12. Yeah.
And then that's it. That's section 14 in total. So I think that works.
Yeah, but I think this actually does cover vertical site distances though. Section 11 says horizontal and vertical site distances in all directions at intersections shall be noted on the plans. Site distances at intersections shall be provided as indicated on section 14.6. And then section 12 says stopping site distance is the sum of two distances. And it defines what stopping site distance is.
And just keep in mind too, we do have some site distance considerations at the intersection on the subdivision. So We'll
All
want
right, so
There's-
Shawn, are
there's
you
one
recommending,
inter-
we keep these in for now and defer it?
Yeah, I don't see
Dan.
any reason, I don't see any reason not to. Just keep them in, and then if we need relief, we'll certainly consider it.
The concern is, as long as it's clear that 11 and 12 are only applicable to that one intersection in the site, I just don't want to have to revisit, anyone questioning what we've done and spent a lot of time on relative to the site entrance.
Seekonk Street.
Well, we could waive it with respect to just the intersection at Seekonk,
Yep.
That's fine.
Sure.
right, Shawn?
Yep.
Okay.
And if for whatever reason that one intersection presents a problem, it will be obvious and you can deal with it then.
Okay. So next section is slopes. So I worded this, or Shawn reworded this, Chris.
Yep.
You
that's
okay with
fine.
this language?
Yep.
Okay, so for the board's edification, what we're doing here is we're waiving the slope requirement to allow a steeper slope than 3 to 1, but the slope can't exceed 2 to 1. And a 2 to 1 slope has to be designed by an engineer. Okay. Street cross sections. The regulations require cross sections at 50-foot intervals. Shawn's advice was that this can be waived, and we're asking for details on the plans that are consistent with the November 2019 plan set that was provided by the applicant, which was relatively detailed. And Shawn, you're okay with that, right?
Yep. That's a legacy from old design days. We used to cut cross sections every 50 feet. So that's never done anymore.
Okay. Section 4.18, this actually regulates sidewalks on existing streets. So this would apply to Seekonk Street. It would require the applicant to perhaps build a sidewalk on Seekonk Street. And so we're not requiring that here. So we're waiving that subject to the conditions. One of the conditions in the permit is that the applicant will set aside some money that might be used for the town's sidewalk fund in the future. Okay, moving right along. Section 5, this is a very similar section as section 4.14. This section of the regs deals with required improvements within subdivisions. So the first section is just the heading, so I took that out. And then we get into the specific requirements for roads within new subdivisions. Basic requirements can be waived. Roadway construction standards. I don't actually think you need a waiver from this. This is really just a cite to the specific standards. It just defines what the standards are. Chris, I mean, did you interpret this?
Yeah, there was, it included two elements. One was the road geometry, which is everything we just discussed in that subsection 14. And the other was road construction standards. And we are absolutely building to town and state specifications for the construction standards, but the geometry is, as we just discussed, it's going to be waived in certain instances to allow for the road geometry that we've proposed. So the language you see there is what I had proposed. You know, if there's a concern about the way that reads, let me know. Otherwise, I think it reads okay.
Yeah, but this section isn't actually a requirement. It's just it's more just like a citation. It just says these are the reference standards within this document, and it just references things. it doesn't say that the project has to comply with them. It just says, you know, we're going to refer to the Mass Highway Department standards. We're going to refer to the typical cross sections in this book. You know, so I don't think this is a substantive provision. I don't think you need a waiver from it. It's not saying you have to comply with anything.
Okay, you're on tape.
Staking 5.1.4. I talked to Shawn about this. He thought it was okay to waive this. This would require the roadway to be staked every 50 feet. So unless the board has a particular need to do that, then we could waive this.
We'll waive it to 51 feet.
I think Ted's been staked enough.
I think so, yes.
All right, minimum widths and depths of roadways. And I think this just needs to be flushed out a little more. And again, it's what we already talked about. I think we need to specify that we're waiving it down to 24 feet of paved surface, 40 feet of right-of-way. And then in terms of the sidewalk, we don't have any dimensions yet for the sidewalk, correct?
I believe they do have details on it, but you're right. The 44 unit plan doesn't show it in detail with a close-up. So same analysis that you applied to the last one, Dan, is fine. Okay.
Okay, next, clearing and grubbing. I wasn't clear why you needed this.
So the comp permit includes language that we're required to submit a construction operations and maintenance plan that describes in detail construction means and methods and contractor standards. So I propose to waive this requirement, and then we will describe in our O&M plan that is subject to review exactly what we're going to do, where our stockpiles are going to be, how we're going to go about clearing. So the idea was waive this, and we'll discuss it in the plan.
And it's also going to be required as part of your SWIP. So for your NIPD's permit. So it's kind of redundant with some of the other information that you're going to have to provide anyway.
Next, 523 excavations, similar requirement. So are you okay waiving this, Shawn? I mean, I had proposed that we just waive the permit requirement, but that the bylaw would require compliance with Mass Highway standards for excavation. But
I don't see any reason for that.
Okay. So we just waive this?
Yep.
Embankment requirements. Shawn and I talked about this afternoon. Seems like this could be waived. You're asking for the waiver as to all lot construction, not as to the roadway, so that's fine. And then I just added provided that the work is designed by a registered civil engineer.
That's fine.
And then we get to the appendices of the regs. So the first section is fees, and there's a whole schedule of fees in here that are waived because this is not a subdivision. We have conditions in the permit governing post-permit fees, such as peer review and inspections. I did want to call out, however, the unique provisions dealing with street acceptances, because that's kind of a hybrid situation here. We've got a road that's going to be submitted to the town meeting for approval as a public way. And the town typically would require, or ordinarily would require, the submission of a package of materials, which I call an application for determination of completeness. And typically that that application is accompanied by $1,000 filing fee plus $1 per linear foot. And the purpose of that is to enable the planning staff or engineers to review the street acceptance plans and the as-built plans so that the town knows what it's getting when it takes title to this road. And often this is an iterative process where there will be multiple drafts of the plan that go back and forth when there's comments made. So I thought it was important that the town be able to recover the administrative fee that it ordinarily does require for public ways. And I guess I thought that really is kind of outside the 40B process. And, you know, it's not part of a 40B review process. It's not even part of post-permit process. It's really, what we're talking about here is acceptance of a road. So my thinking is that I wanted to call this out in this waiver to be clear that provision is still applicable, in that the applicant would pay the board's, you know, peer review expenses for, you know, reviewing the plans that are submitted.
Is that part of the $25,000 fee for the sidewalks? So we take it out of that if we're not doing that?
I think this
No.
would be the $10,000 fee that we replenish.
The
Nice
peer
try,
review,
Ted. Nice try.
Yeah, typically this is completely different. So this could be 10 years from now, and the road could be, so what we run into, the problem we run into is a street acceptance request gets filed, and you know, the first thing we have to do is go out and do a punch list of stuff that needs to get fixed before the town can even consider accepting the road. So, you know, I'm a little confused as to what is the process for acceptance, given this is a 40B. I would assume that that's got its own, that the acceptance of the road is completely outside this process. It would be subject to the town.
Yeah, that is a separate process. I think, Dan, maybe we table this because you added some language to the permit as well that talks about this, and I wanted to discuss that. So I think Shawn pointed out this side of the sort of review and sign off could be years down the road when the town actually accepts it or when it's presented for acceptance. So I just want to distinguish between standards for lot releases and final sign-offs to get lots and bonds released versus this review, which is a different review. And let's discuss that when we discuss maybe the language you added to the permit.
yeah, that's fine. I just didn't want to leave a gap here so that, because I'm dealing with this in another town actually right now, and there's a lot of finger pointing as to who has responsibility and authority to do what. So I want to make our permit very clear as to what the process will be.
I know they're not pointing the finger at you, Dan. You don't leave anything.
Exactly. I'm just a bomb thrower. All right. The next appendix is the forms. And I looked at these forms and I thought that actually forms K, L, and M were good forms to be used. They're checklists as just to remind everybody what has to be done to get to completion of a road. And I don't think those are onerous to the applicant. So I call those out.
So Dan, I've run into trouble with, and because this is a revision that I'm just seeing now. I'm pulling up the form K, E, F, G. Subdivision inspection checklist. Now this, yeah, so this isn't going to fly, Dan. You know, there's one agency and ultimately one consultant that is going to sign off on some of these things. And this has us running around collecting 44 signatures and sign-offs. So this Form K, you know, my guess is the town doesn't even use it. They have it, but I don't even think they use it. And we're certainly not going to use this in a 40B context.
Oh, this is basically an inspection checklist, and these are the things that you're going to have to get done anyway. It's not, this isn't stuff that you're avoiding. It's, you know, for the hydrants, you're going to need water department sign off. For the fire alarm inspection, you need fire department to sign off.
Yeah, so the permit has language about closing things out. I think employing this checklist is problematic for a 40B project because you're supposedly granting jurisdiction to the tree warden and the planning board agent. And I think if you want to use this in a vacuum without responsible agency, signature of agent, and date of observation, then I mean, I don't think we need it in the permit. I mean, the consulting engineer that we pay a lot of money to hire for the town so that that person can act as the construction monitor for the project, that's who signs off on these things and then reports back to the zoning board, and then the zoning board signs off.
What if we just say we're using these as a reference?
That's
That was
fine.
my intent.
That's fine. Let's use them as a reference.
Okay.
For, yeah, that's fine.
I didn't intend for you to go around and collect signatures. It was more just the checklist is so that we know what to look for when we're closing on a project.
John, you okay with that? Shawn?
Yeah, and I caution too, it's sometimes these checklists are really helpful in terms of just getting everybody understanding things the same way. So sometimes they're pretty helpful. I get Chris's comment that they shouldn't have to chase around signatures, but the checklists and having them filled out are usually pretty helpful.
Okay, thanks.
All right, typical cross sections, that seem to be reasonable since we are agreeing that you're going to provide the detail that you provided in November. And of course, your revised submission is going to be subject to Shawn's review and his discretion. So that seemed fine to me. And Shawn, you're okay with C and D?
Yep.
Okay. All right. So, moving on to Board of Health. So the first section here is a section that we've been dealing with every project, and it really governs the fees that are applied to Title V applications that are submitted to the Board of Health. I think where we land on this is that the fees the Board of Health charges should not be waived, because this is, yes, it's a local bylaw that sets the fee amounts, but this is really to reimburse the town for its review expenses. And so it doesn't seem to be appropriate to deprive the town of that funding source where everybody else pays for them. So I think the board's position would be not to waive these. We aren't waiving them for the 194 Main Street project. So
if I could just interject, Mr. Chairman, what we were looking for was a waiver of the fees or a reduction on the fees on the affordable units. I believe the Enclave got a reduction on the fees on their affordable units, and we are contributing to the sidewalk. I think we're the only project so far that has contributed to the sidewalk, and we're also going to put approximately 4 to 5 acres into green space in the center of the project. So we're just looking for some kind of assistance on the affordable units, because they are a benefit to the town and the community, and we build them at a loss. So.
Dan, one thing I would say in consideration of that, right, so these are going to be applied for, the affordable units are going to be applied equally with 3 other units.
Yep.
And so in reviewing the 4 together, there's some efficiency of scale there that perhaps, reviewing them all at the same time rather than just, each lot independently is going to give you some cost savings that sort of justify that relief.
well, each house is going to have its own septic, isn't it? I mean, there's 2 components. There's going to be a common system for the multifamilies, and then each house is going to have their own, correct?
Right, but I would expect them to get filed concurrently, the 3 market units along with the affordable unit, so that you're not getting one review one month, another review another month, So I would expect these to come in groups as opposed to individually.
True, but each lot is its own animal, right? You need to have 2 test pits in each leaching field. I mean, I guess I'm just, this money is used to witness test pits and to confirm water elevations. And then for the common septic system, I believe that would trigger the section of the regs that essentially just require the applicant to pay for the board's agent's review, which is Wade Saucier, and he charges $90 an hour. So I think it would be very difficult to not. I mean, basically the town would have to eat that cost if it was going to reduce Wade's fees by a quarter. I'm not sure how that would work.
Yeah, I agree with Dan, Ted, and Chris. I don't think we can do that. I mean, it's just, we didn't do it on 194. And I think we want to be consistent with this. And I think he's going to review each system, and I think there may be some economies of scale there, Shawn. But I would be remiss, especially in this day and age, to actually waive those fees. I don't know if any of the board members have any concerns.
Yeah, I don't believe we waived these for Enclave either. I think what we waived for Enclave was the water connection fee for the affordable.
Dan, I kind of see the writing on the wall as to where this is going, but I do just want to make one point, and there may be some discussion about this in the permit conditions, but I'm still unclear, or I'm not certain as to who is going to be the lead reviewer on the common system. So my concern there is I don't want duplicate fees. So if we're going to pay Tetra Tech to be the consulting engineer on the shared system for the duplexes, which is one system, we shouldn't be paying review fees to the Board of Health to also review that system. So as long as that concern is resolved, which I think it should be a reasonable concern, I guess the writing's on the wall that, we're in interesting times. I can understand the town wants to make sure it's getting its revenue, but we just shouldn't be paying twice. So how do we take care of that concern?
Yeah, that seems like a reasonable compromise.
Yeah, my expectation, and Shawn can correct me if I'm wrong, but my expectation of the scope of Shawn's review as it pertained to the common septic system was that he was only looking at it from a standpoint of size, location, and how it interacts with other systems such as the drainage system and the buildings.
Yeah,
And
constructability and feasibility only, really.
Right. And so what Wade is looking at is test pits and groundwater levels, elevations, and the actual specifications of the system itself. And that's not what Shawn's looking at.
And Wade's fee is going to be $1,275 plus his time spent on site at the 90 whatever dollars an hour.
Okay.
So we're not talking, I don't think we're talking a lot of money here.
Yeah,
So
I will be doing almost no review of the Title V elements.
Yeah.
All right, as long as we clarify that, because, I think, Dan, you and I had gone back and forth in that there's still maybe some red sections in the permit. So I guess, Ted, any other comment on this one?
No, that's fine. I understand times are a little tough now, so not a problem. I thought it was prudent to ask, so.
So can we take this out?
I think so.
Okay. The next section is the Board of Health.
Excuse me, sorry, Dan. You did say that the enclave got the water hookup fees waived for the enclave. So I hope we can get the similar waive of the water hookup fees on our affordables.
If you didn't ask for it, we can make a note of it. I don't know if I saw that here or not.
I believe we asked for everything.
Yeah,
there.
it's
Oh, here it
down.
is. Yeah, it's right here.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. All right. So the next Board of Health regulation was the fees for the Board of Health's review of the subdivision, which is separate from its review of a Title V application. And so that's appropriate to waive. We've waived that for other projects. So that's fine. Then you've got the local health regulations governing small wastewater facilities. That's fine to be waived. Wade is comfortable with that. And by the way, just for everyone's edification, Wade Saucier had reviewed similar waiver requests that were submitted by the applicant of 194 Main Street. And so I basically know what his feelings are with respect to these regulations, and I'm just applying those here. The next section is the board's septic system regulations. And this is actually a relatively comprehensive set of regs with a lot of different requirements. And we actually went into a fair amount of detail looking at these for 194 Main. So I was reluctant to recommend that we just waive this as a blanket waiver. I know Wade is particularly likes several of the provisions, and if you don't know what you need right now, this seems like another candidate for deferral.
Yeah, so Dan, this one, and I wasn't sure whether there was going to be any further discussion on this, but this is really critical for us in terms of the idea that we are settling for 44 units. And as you know, we're proposing individual Title V septic systems. And a material part of our agreement to pursue this 44 unit plan was to just be subject to what Title V requires. You know, I know there are requirements locally about the times for testing and, you know, the way that soils are tested and whatnot. It is critical. And I go back to this whole idea that the 44 unit plan is premised on this, that it's per Title V only. So I don't think it's the same discussion that you might have had with Main Street. You know, this is material. So please keep that in mind in looking at this. It's not, let's come back later on these types of things.
Main Street's a much denser site, right?
Well, it's a common septic system. So
On a denser site.
It's 36 units on a tight site.
Yeah.
But I would say that your shared system for the 20, how many multifamily units are there? I mean, you've got a shared system for
28 units.
28 units. I mean, I think a good compromise might be to apply the local regulations to that system, because I think they're more important for those types of systems. And there's certainly provisions in there that can be waived even as to the big system. And I would suggest we look at the waivers we granted for 194. We've made those decisions, which include the timed season when you measure for groundwater, and the board agreed that it was okay to waive the local requirement, which required groundwater measurements to be taken.
Dan, for the shared system, you know, we already have witness test pits in that area, and we've done a ton of hydrogeo testing in that area for the shared system. You know, is that, do we need to go down this road?
No, we're not. And again, we waived the geotechnical report that's required for under the local regs. So that's something that can be waived. I think there are a few provisions of the local regs that Wade feels are important, such as inspections and testings of the components of the septic system before it's put into operation. He was pretty adamant about having those in there.
Okay, I can follow you with respect to the shared system on those types of local requirements. Can we get a compromise that the single family systems are clearly just Title V only, and then we'll deal with the shared system essentially on par with the shared system for 194 Main?
I think conceptually that sounds fair, but I do think we should just look at the regs that you want waived and make it.
No, I mean, going back to the single families, Dan, that was the premise of going in the 44 unit for the 44 unit plan. The single families just have to be hands off as far as local. I can appreciate you pushing on the shared system, but you know, we only decided to go down this road if we were subject to Title V only. And
If I could just interject 1 second, Mr. Chairman, I believe your consultant engineer, Shawn Reardon, has been given a lot of oversight on several of the single-family homes. So we don't have a problem with Shawn overseeing all of the single-family homes, if that's a requirement. But Shawn's going to be very much involved with 2 or 3 of the homes for the Parcel C
Yes.
section of the agreement.
Mhm.
well, again, Ted, we're not, the Board of Health still has independent jurisdiction. So Shawn, again, is just looking at siting and orientation. He's not granting you your wastewater, your disposal system construction works permit to build a septic system. So it's not like Shawn's signing the permit. Dan, going back to that premise, I mean, this again was material. So I think it's a fair compromise to say 194 main for the shared system on par, but the single families, whatever complies with Title V, we need some, it's just, that was the reason we proceeded. Okay, now if we're gonna go line by line, we can do that, but I don't think we should have to.
Okay, so I guess I could recommend that that we table this, or, we can provisionally agree with you. And then I really do think it's prudent for us to check in with Wade to make sure we're not giving away the store for some reason on some issue. I don't think we are with respect to the single families. I think that's a fair compromise, but I would feel a lot more comfortable just running this by Wade. But it's up to the board, and the board can.
And if I can add is, so Title V for single family homes is pretty robust. But to Wade's point, if there's something that he just wants to get an extra level of comfort that things are truly installed the way they're supposed to be installed. Like, for example, Title V doesn't require a sort of an inspection or a clear well test or anything like that before putting things into application. If there's some minor element like that that'll help Wade be satisfied, maybe you keep that in. But the soils out there and Title V, the single family homes are pretty comprehensively covered by Title V. But to your point, if there's a couple things that you want to keep in, then I'd suggest that Chris and Ted consider doing that, because it just might make everything easier for them in the end anyway.
Yeah, that's fine. That won't be a problem.
But to be clear, Ted, given that these are governed by Board of Health under state regs, I don't anticipate doing anything related to them other than to making sure that they're feasible and constructible.
Okay.
All right, so Chris Weider, board, are we okay with this approach?
I'm okay with that. I don't know if any of the members want to weigh in.
Yeah, I'm okay with it.
Yeah, I'm okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay, I'll make a note and we'll follow up on this this week. Groundwater supply regulations, there's a requirement for a groundwater impact report. We can waive that. As Chris noted, we did collect a fair amount of groundwater hydrology information during the course of the hearing. And then the well regulations, I'm not even sure why this is required as a waiver. This seems to, you're not proposing wells, right? So do you even need this, Chris?
Well-regulated private and semi-public well testing requirements. What does it say? Did you read it?
I'd have to try to find it.
What are you guys getting paid for?
I get
Read it
paid
before
to
you
ask
have
for
to
the.
waive
I
it.
get paid to ask for the waivers. Dan gets paid to deny them.
Ted, you better review your contract.
Too late now after 3 years.
I agree.
All right, why don't we table this, Chris? And we're obviously going to need to have another conversation, and so you can tell us if you really need this or not.
Yeah, Dan, and to the extent it applies, I'd just be cautious of the fact that people might want to put like irrigation wells in or something like that. So just because Ted's not proposing any sort of private water supply wells doesn't mean that there might not be some more mercurial situation that needs to be covered in this.
Okay, so that takes us through the waiver list. It's 8:40. We've made some good progress. Do you want to keep going and look at the conditions?
Absolutely.
Okay. Pull that up.
You may not get Shawn back again.
Excuse me, Chris, do you want to take questions on the waivers first or wait until you've done the conditions as well?
I think we'll do the conditions first and then we'll look at questions.
Okay.
Thank you, Amy.
Yep.
Unless the applicant would like to take questions now, or Dan?
No, I think that's
Okay.
fine because I think
I think they
some of
tie in
these-
together.
Yeah, there might be some overlapping questions.
All
Okay,
right.
Dan.
All right, so Chris plugged in the references to the architectural plans. On condition A3, this starts the discussion about the framework here of having the plans reviewed by our consulting engineer after the permit's been issued. We just added some language if for some reason Shawn quits his job and I don't know, becomes a monk or something, and he's gone, and we have to find somebody to take his place.
No immediate plans.
Okay.
I did think about becoming an attorney.
No.
40B1?
Just kidding.
All right, so section B1, this is the deposit for the peer review account. Is the board okay with the $10,000 deposit? I think I had actually started with 20,000 in here.
Yeah, I think we reduced it at the last meeting to 10,000, replenishable after it goes to, I think, 2,500.
Yes.
Yes, that seems fine.
Okay. Moving right along. Section B13. All right, so I think, Chris, you think I have this in here already somewhere else, is that right?
Yeah, if you go up to B9, you state the same thing, so.
Yeah.
It says applicable sheets of the final plan shall be signed, sealed, professional land surveyor, engineer, architect.
Yeah, okay.
Dan, does that say or just, can you go back to that last one? Just quick question.
Are you trying to be a lawyer, Shawn?
No, I just don't want to cause any problems.
The final plan shall be
It's
signed.
and. I think
Yeah,
it is the
so-
same language.
It's the same idea. Applicable.
Okay. All right, Shawn, stay in your lane.
Sorry.
You just passed the 40B course of
Listen, I
No,
see where Shawn was going there, but no
It's
need
just like
to
the
start
lane assist on my
tinkering.
car, right? Just get back in your lane.
Yeah.
All right, so C10, the applicant is asking for a waiver from any fees, basically any fee that's imposed as to affordable units. And, we haven't done that in the past, and it doesn't sound like the board is inclined to do that here. Is that right?
Ted, do you want to reiterate your request on the water connection fees for the affordable units? In light
Yeah,
of,
I'm fairly certain that the enclave did get a waiver on its water connection fees. I thought it had actually got other additional fees waived as well on its affordable units. But as long as we get a similar kind of consideration as that project, I'd be quite content.
I don't I don't think we gave Al any consideration for the affordables. And I think the enclave was unique in that they're doing sidewalks, which would equal to you putting into the sidewalk mitigation fund, but they're also they're repaving the road, Village Green, all the way down to Cleveland Street. And they're actually doing sidewalk on Cleveland Street in addition to the sidewalk on Village Green down to Rockwood Road. So I think they're a little bit unique. And I think at 194, we did not grant the waiver for the affordables or the market value. So unless somebody on the board has a different opinion, I think we've got to be consistent. And we've actually, I think, already drafts to Abbeville. We've done similar, but Abbeville is going to have a different situation that they might be paying for some labor to install 12-inch main for additional hookups. So I think this is more consistent with not 194. But unless anybody else on the board has some concern about this, I think we've got to be consistent with 194 and not grant any waivers to the affordable units as well.
In Rockwood too. And I don't think we've done this for the other 40Bs.
Right.
Yeah, I understand.
Yeah. No.
As long as we're consistent, you know how I feel about consistency.
Yeah.
Anybody else on the board?
I agree, Chris, with you.
I agree as well, as long as we're consistent.
Yeah.
I'm on board with that also. It makes a lot of sense, and that's been the process we've been following. So let's continue.
All right, section C14, and this is brand new as of tonight. This is a section that governs the process for the acceptance of the road when it's ready to be accepted. And my motivation for doing this, as I mentioned, is that if we don't have crystal clear language in the decision now, several years from now, when the road might be ready to be accepted, there's going to be some ambiguity as to who does what, who's responsible for reviewing it, who pays for it. And I can tell you the project that I'm working on right now in the town of Grafton, that project was permitted by the zoning board in 2003. So it's finally getting approved, 10 years and change later. And those things do happen, and it's better to plan for this in advance so we know what the process is going to be. I don't know if the town has there even been a 40B project in Norfolk that has an accepted public way in it?
They do. Meeting House is an accepted public way, but that was a bit of a unique hybrid as well.
Okay. So what I tried to do here was just import what the planning board does. So I took the language from section 3462, and this is similar language to other towns. They require the filing of an application for a determination of completeness. And that application package would include all the kinds of things that the town would want to see before it takes title to a road. So I laid out, well, the regulation requires a few things such as Board of Health sign off and a plan set, which is called the accepted street plan set as built. And so that has to be submitted with sufficient detail. And then there's a few other things that I laid out, itemized here in this paragraph, the kind of things that that I've seen in other towns that I think are good for the town to have when it's looking at accepting a public way. None of this should be onerous on any developer. It's all fairly standard stuff. And the bottom line is we don't want this road to be put in front of town meeting until we're completely satisfied that everything's been built in accordance with our regulations, except to the extent they've been waived, and built to last with good workmanship. And so that's going to be inspected and reviewed by our consulting engineer. He'll give us a report. He'll say either it's done or it's not. As Shawn mentioned, oftentimes there's punch lists and then there's back and forth. So that's why we need some fees to pay for that. And in most towns, there's a hearing. And the reason for the hearing is just typically, if you have residents of a subdivision who want to weigh in one way or the other, that gives them the ability to have their say. And then ultimately, if the road is complete, then the board issues a determination of completeness, and then it can proceed to the Board of Selectmen for the layout, and then town meeting for acceptance. And that's governed by state statute. So I know Chris Agostino just saw this probably a couple hours before tonight's meeting and may not have had a chance to review it.
Yeah, Dan, I think generally, we're on the same page.
Yeah.
It makes sense to outline a process. My two comments are, one, generally, when I've done this in the context of a 40B before, you mentioned that you require Board of Health sign off. In the context of a 40B, the zoning board's recommendation or zoning board's referral for acceptance is what initiates the then legislative process to actually get town meeting to accept the road. So that comment that the zoning board has the local authority to make the recommendation just leads me to the only initial comment I have regarding this section, which is your subsection 4 talking about completed Form K checklist. I think, again, the Form K checklist is fine as far as making sure that everything's done, but we shouldn't be required to get other local agencies to sign off on the referral. As long as the zoning board signs off on it, that on completeness, then we're okay. So, if you're okay in concept with those ideas, I think, I'll take another read through this and we'll finalize it.
Yeah, and I'd make one recommendation too, is that we should have a discussion about the stormwater infrastructure. So I'd prefer not to saddle the town with the obligation of maintaining the stormwater infrastructure. I'd prefer that be maintained by the homeowners association.
Well, I don't think there's going to be one. Right,
No,
right,
homeowners
Chris?
association?
No, Dan, so the idea was in the interim between shovel in the ground and application for acceptance, I think you plugged in a couple words in the permit that says the developer and any association. And I think what we had discussed doing on the development team was we have the condo trust there. I think the condo was going to potentially just manage those rather, in the interim, rather than the full homeowners association. But I think Shawn's point is, are the catch basins and that sort of infrastructure going to be the town's responsibility or the applicant's responsibility? Just taking a step back, if this was just a subdivision and there was a catch basin in the roadway, wouldn't, if it was accepted, wouldn't the town be responsible for just cleaning out the catch basin? Isn't that what the taxes pay for?
Sorry, hold on a second. Yeah, so the catch basins, anything within the road would still be the town's maintenance responsibility. I'm thinking more the detention basins.
Yeah.
Isn't it more common though, Shawn, for those to be part of the town's responsibility and on a public, with a public way?
It is, and in this case, I'm a little less concerned about it because they're all at grade basins. But if they were underground basins or something like that, then I'd probably be a little bit more hard-nosed about it. So I don't think it's a big obligation to maintain the above ground system. So, but it would be a good idea to check with probably DPW or something who's going to own that responsibility.
Dan, didn't we have the Enclave? Aren't they maintaining, their homeowners association maintaining the detention basin at the rear of the property project?
Well, they are, but that's a private development. That's not a public way.
Right, but I think remember we talked to the DPW director, and I think at the time he was pretty adamant about their inability due to lack of personnel to maintain that type of detention basin. I mean, currently they can't maintain the existing retention basins in town. So I mean, maybe something we need to have a conversation with them about, but it seems to be problematic with them right now.
I believe that basin in the enclave was hard to get to. I think it's behind the buildings.
That was.
And
Yeah,
this,
there's a road, we've got a road going back there to maintain it, yeah.
I mean, these basins.
How does like, so how will the parking spaces in the bus stop in the common areas be maintained if not for a homeowners association?
Yeah, and again, Shawn, we did put a sentence in the permit that references a homeowners association, and then it's sort of a placekeeper. I think Dan and I touched upon this conversation that you're having right now. So, you know, I think the question is, to what extent does the road get accepted? And I thought when we talked about it that we would propose whatever's within the road. So there would have to be some continuing maintenance obligation for things like the bus shelter and that parking. And the question was whether it's a homeowners association, or whether, you know, an underlying homeowners association, or the condo trust has a few extra bucks to take care of it and the homeowners just benefit from that, or the homeowners pay the condo trust to do it, you know, pay a share into the condo budget to take care of it. I think we could sort this out offline. I mean, I get the point, Shawn. There are definitely, you know, the town's not going to accept the bus shelter. I don't believe.
Right. In Norfolk, I think you want to be able to control the crap that gets into the detention pond too, because they're going to be part of the amenities almost when you think about it.
Yeah, the best organization to make sure that that's dealt with is usually the condo.
Yeah.
The condo trust. So however we get the money to the condo trust, you know, whether we do a homeowners association that pays a couple bucks and then they contribute. Let me talk to Ted about that.
So Chris, what we typically do on that is in the final plan, you'd have the public layout laid out, and then there may be drainage easements or something like that that the detention basins are in, and that the only thing that the town would accept is what's in the public layout. So that would include your catch basins and things like that.
Okay.
And then we'd have the town would have an easement to clean out the basins if it wants to, right? But it's not
Right.
obligated to.
Yep.
Only if it wants to, or by extension, the homeowners association or the condo trust would have the rights to clean it out as well.
Okay. I mean, from a practical standpoint, does that ever happen? I mean, I can imagine that, you know, the HOA is probably never going to do it, and then it's going to fall on the town to take care of it.
Well, it depends on how the conditions in the Concom get written too. So sometimes the mindset is changing. I mean, they're getting more and more teeth on these things. So, and it's not a very big lift. It's maybe once every 10 years, you got to do something
Yeah, you contract with a company that you pay an annual fee,
Yeah.
and they just show up and do it.
Okay.
All
All right. So we'll follow up with DPW. Chris
It's
Weeder and I
section-
need to talk to them anyway about some issues. So we'll put that in our agenda.
Yeah, we have some placekeeper language in the permit elsewhere. It's C3. We can edit a little bit.
C3.
C1 and C3. We talked briefly about this, Dan.
Yeah. I mean, there's a big basin behind the condo buildings. Is that intended for runoff, or is that for something else?
That's stormwater.
I mean, not stormwater. Is this intended for the road runoff or for building runoff, or what is this for?
It's most likely road runoff, but it's not separated, Dan, from one or the other, but it'll in all likelihood be road runoff.
Okay, so that's a good example of something that the condo association should be taking care of. 'Cause it's
Yes.
back. Okay. All right, section D just deals with affordability requirements. This is all boilerplate. Section E, project construction. A lot of this is also boilerplate. I think we talked about the hours of operation, hours of construction at a prior meeting, and we were surprised to learn that the town's bylaws are pretty liberal in terms of when people can work. And then, let's see, section E8 dealing with backfill, gravel for the roadways, and soil material for the roadway construction shall be tested, not for foundations. And Shawn, are you okay with that?
Dan, a bunch of it's black on my screen. Yeah, there we go.
Sorry. Or was I E8? Yeah.
Yep, that's fine.
All right. Blasting, these are our standard conditions. Then we have this, a couple of conditions here governing the protection of wells. And there would be a well monitoring plan prior to any blasting on the site. What we set here was a protocol that any well within 1,000 feet of any blasting charge location would be monitored and tested. So I know, Chris, you had requested this to be limited down to 500 feet. But I think our preference would be to keep this at 1,000. Do you want to make a pitch for that, or are you okay with 1,000 feet?
Yeah, I mean, we identified potentially one area, and it would be right around where the roundabout is near the entranceway. And generally the preference is to do chipping versus blasting. So, you know, it's going to be limited now that we've revised the plan, but we still did obviously, you know, given the amount of hydro-geo work that we did to determine the direction that water was flowing and whatnot, and to, you know, confirm that there wouldn't be any issues, we felt as though 500 was reasonable. What we're more concerned with is the revision that came back in the last draft, Dan, about, you know, if there's an issue, it's going to shut down the whole project. And, you know, it's one thing to say that, you know, we would have some obligation to, you know, address whatever the abutters' concerns are and make sure that there's water available there. But to shut down the project, if there are allegations of a problem with the performance standards, that's of more concern.
Well, I think it's more than allegations. If in fact an abutter's well is shut down because of some impact from blasting, and so that's, we hope it's a remote occurrence and probably unlikely to happen, but if it does happen and somebody's well has to be turned off, it seems to me that would be cause to put a pause on the blasting.
Okay, well, yeah, I would agree, put a pause on the blasting, but what you have is may not apply for a building permit or commence any additional site clearing work. So that's right. You know, fine putting a pause on the blasting.
I think your point, Dan, is we want to get whatever that well is up and running again. So I think that's a concern, Chris, is we don't want to say we'll get back to you within a week. You know, if somebody's well has failed due to this within 1,000 feet, I think the point is to get that well up and running again as quickly as possible. So that becomes a priority. And I think that's what you're looking for, Dan, correct?
Yeah, you're right. And this is the incentive for you to do that, is that you're going to have a very strong financial incentive to fix that well immediately.
You know, let's just put this, let's take a step back and put this into practice here, though. Okay. Yes. Can we come up with some other incentive? Because the idea of shutting down a project when a construction loan has been taken. We're in the middle of site construction. I mean, you can imagine that is I'm not downplaying, the idea that an abutter has been impacted. And again, it's an absolute remote possibility. But this type of consequence to shut down the whole project, as you're getting into site development is you talk about penalties versus incentive. This is more than incentive. This is a death knell. So I think there has to be some other option here. And I wish we had a chance to discuss this. I know I had stricken this language a few weeks back. Is there any other arrangement versus, relative to shutting the site down?
Chris, to your point too, within the NIPD's permit, if the site's shut down for any more than 15 days, you have to stabilize all your excavated surfaces. So there are, extend into other things.
Yeah. I've gotten phone calls from projects when they've been shut down, and you can't have this type of penalty. It just doesn't work.
All right, what if we put an obligation on here that the Abutters well be remedied, whether through a connection to the town water system or a new well within 15 days of the confirmation of the violation?
Perfect.
That was too quick. Shawn, does that make sense? Or
Yeah, quick question, but what's the mechanism through which the well would get terminated or otherwise, what triggers this?
well, there's going to be a baseline test of the well,
Okay.
and then blasting's going to happen. And then if a neighbor reports there to be a problem, there'll be an additional test to confirm the problem.
Mm-hmm.
And so in my mind, that when that confirmation occurs from the Board of Health, that would then trigger this requirement that the applicant do something to restore the well or to restore the service, the water service.
What I'm concerned about is there's sort of ambiguity as to what the specific trigger is that would require a fix. So does it have to be determined that the well is unsafe maybe that's what we say is upon the determination by the Board of Health that the well is unsafe, that would be the trigger. Otherwise, it's kind of murky as to when these conditions kick in.
Well, there's two standards: it's water, it's water quality and water quantity. And water quality, all of these elements have state thresholds, I believe. And so if any of those thresholds are tripped, then that's a violation of the performance standards.
Yeah, Dan, I think the language that you drafted, I think the mechanism's all there. I think the 15 days is fine. The only thing I would ask is that the applicant shall undertake to install a new private undertake the cure within 15 days and expeditiously continue it. And that's the obligation. If for whatever reason that obligation is not complied with, then the death knell would be available.
And if I could interrupt, Mr. Chairman, as well, I'd also like, I was under the understanding that we were getting the 500 feet radii, and now it's back up to 1,000. Is there any way we can kind of split the difference and come in at 750 feet?
I think this came from Shawn. Shawn, do you want to weigh in on that?
Yeah, the 500 feet was really small because basically there's no wells. We're measuring to wells, not to property, right?
Yeah, my understanding there was going to be one well at 500 feet.
If that. So it just seemed a little bit almost, it seemed a little bit intentional. So, the 1,000 feet now, I'm just sensitive to having changed it from the original number and the perception that creates, whether it's being strategic or not. I think we're all better off just leaving it at 1,000, and then, given the extremely low likelihood that anything's going to be damaged by a blasting, because I mean, this isn't trench blasting. This is just open face blasting. It's like the easiest stuff ever, the smallest stuff ever.
It's just we'd have to survey all to get the base case for all the wells within 1,000 feet. Whereas if we narrow it down to 750, we'd only be dealing with possibly 6 homes. So that was.
And what would it be at 1,000 feet?
I'm not sure. I haven't. I was under the understanding we were getting 500 feet. So.
Yeah, I mean, Ted, I'd be surprised if you've got more than 2 or 3 wells within where you're going to blast.
Okay.
Yeah, I'd be surprised if you even blast. I mean, do you really think you're going to blast?
Hopefully not.
Yeah.
So hopefully not. There's only one location where we're expecting any difficulty. So.
Just
So we good on 1,000 now?
I think it's 750, Mister, because we're not looking for fees. You're going to help us.
Do I hear 1,000 once? Do I hear 1,000 twice?
Give and take, Mr. Chairman. This is free to the town. This doesn't cost the town.
I mean, I think the risks of a problem is so remote. The 750 is fine with me. I just don't like the perception of it with being reduced for a tactical reason.
Yeah. I think the state standards call for, is it 400 feet? So we're actually exceeding that quite.
Then why don't we make it 800? Then it's twice the state standard.
800 is fine. I'll go with 800.
Yeah, is okay with that?
Is the state standard 400, Shawn?
I don't know.
I thought it was 500.
Well, I know 400 feet is the interim wellhead protection area around a public water supply.
Oh, maybe that's it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we want to check this, Dan, and just get this back? We got a couple little open issues. Do we want to just verify that?
So you want to do something less than 1,000?
Well, I mean, we rely on Shawn, I think, here, and I think he said 1,000, but he's waffling a little bit on us here.
So there is just the 800 does make sense. So in public water supplies, right, there's a 400-foot lead protection area established around a public water supply. So if we double that to 800, there's at least a scientific justification for it. So I think 800 is a reasonable number with basis.
I agree with you, Shawn.
Oh, Ed, you just ruined it.
Anybody on the board? Anybody on the board have a problem with Shawn's reduction of 200 feet? Tim?
And we could just have a language, and I agree with Shawn's recommendation. We could just say the lesser of 1,000 feet or twice the state minimum.
There may not be a state minimum. I'm not familiar with the regulation that governs
would
this.
defer to the 1,000 then, if there's no state.
Yeah, there is, and what I'm applying is a protection zone around a public water supply. So DEP requires 400 feet of no disturbance, no development around any public water supply. So if we went twice that distance, then you're twice as far away as even a public water supply would.
Yeah, I'm just trying to protect the abutters out there and not let them have a loss for, a week or a month or whatever. That's all.
And one more thing, Mr. Chairman, if a homeowner decides to opt out of the baseline testing, I assume they're not going to qualify for any remediation after if they come later and say that they have a problem with their well.
Correct. I think Dan has to put that language in there.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, if I can clarify that here.
And Dan, the commence to cure within 15 days concept, I think is critical.
Yeah, I'm saying within 14 days of confirmation of an exceedance, be obligated to install a new private drinking water well or provide a town water connection at the owner's expense.
To commence installation and expeditiously prosecute installation to completion or something, but it just, you can't, I mean, who knows if you can't complete it within, it's just, it's got to get done, but you can't shut down the whole project. And again, it's so remote, but the consequences are so dire that you have to balance it out.
Okay.
Ted, do you have a well?
Yes, we do.
Is it a gravel well or is it a bedrock well?
I believe it's a bedrock well. We surveyed, I believe, 7 properties, 7 wells, and we got the information for them. But that was to do with the sewage treatment plant that we were proposing initially.
Okay.
So.
Okay, we okay with this language?
Yeah, that's fine, Dan.
Okay. All right, and I'll work on finessing this section as well, as we talked about. Water quantity. And I'll make sure all these are consistent.
Okay.
E15 and 16, we've talked about. 16 is the requirement for the vertical curb at the edge of the paved surface between the road and sidewalk. The open space we've talked about. There's going to be a conservation restriction on the open space. I need to follow up with the commission to make sure they're okay with our draft restriction. Section G, public safety. This contains the language on the site distance issue. Section G6 is the provision for the $25,000 escrow for additional improvements or sidewalks. Section G9 deals with water pressure. So I had some follow-up today with the fire chief, and he's okay with the hydrant fire flow test that was done in 2018 that shows there's enough water pressure on the street. He's just remaining concerned about water pressure within the project site and wants to be assured that there's going to be adequate water pressure there. So I drafted this section. This is language that the chief gave me in terms of what they would like to see for water pressure for the hydrants, and that proof of compliance with these water pressure requirements would have to be provided to the chief, prior to the occupancy of the project to ensure that we've got the adequate water pressure. Did you have a chance to look at this, Chris?
Yeah, I think it's okay, Dan. It's a state requirement, so.
Okay. And then on G14,
I think just for everybody's benefit, if there's an issue with the pressure up the hill, you can add a pump to the system within the subdivision. So it's a state requirement. You need pressure. So
G14 deals with the access for emergency vehicles, and again, I followed up with the chief today, and I proposed this compromise that instead of requiring the developer to put the base coat of pavement down prior to foundations, that you could convince the fire chief that whatever condition roadway you've got out there at the time, whether it's gravel or something else, that if that's adequate for ambulances to get down to the area of construction, then if the fire chief's okay with that, then you can proceed with your foundation permits.
That's fine.
All right. Water lines have to be installed prior to the construction of any combustible structures. So I think that's the intent there.
Yep.
The surety provisions, we haven't touched since last time. Those are all acceptable. Water, wastewater utilities. This is not controversial. And that takes us to the end of the conditions. And I want to go just back to the waivers for a second, because we may have skipped over something. Yeah, and I'm sorry, I missed this last page when we were talking about waivers, and this has some of the fees in here. So DPW fees, which would include the water connection fees. The applicant is asking for a waiver of the service connection fee for the affordable units, and that was $28.50. So is the board's prerogative to deny that request?
I believe excuse me, Mr. Chairman, I believe the Enclave got this, the water fees waived on the affordables.
They did.
Yes.
But they're building a bridge and a nice walkway to Boardman Street. They're doing a sidewalk. I believe
Well, we're giving
Street.
25,000 for the sidewalk.
I know you are. It's
Mr.
wonderful.
Chairman.
I give you an A for effort. I don't know if any other board members have a concern of this, but I think I think in these times, as Ted said earlier, I think we're not going to be so generous with waivers for fees. But I don't know if any other board members have any input on that. I guess not. You tried. You tried.
Denied.
And
In all caps.
I just
we
noticed
didn't
that.
want to say denied. We just sort of let it die slowly. But deny it.
At least he didn't use
Nasty
red ink,
word.
he used purple ink, so.
That's right. That's right.
As long as the bank doesn't stamp everything with that, we'll be all set.
All right. It looks like we covered everything else. So we're at the end. We have some follow-up work to do on these. So, Mr. Chairman, do you want to keep the hearing open to wrap up?
Yeah, I think it's to the benefit of the applicant. I know we probably have some public questions, or we might have some public questions, but I think for the applicant's benefit, I wouldn't want to close the public hearing before you have a chance to clean these up a little bit so that Chris and Ted can weigh in if they feel necessary. Chris, do you agree?
Yeah, although I think substantively, the board has a pretty good handle on, you know, the issues that we discussed tonight, and, you know, could direct counsel to follow up and resolve them consistent with the deliberations this evening. And then, you know, the board could look at the language at a later date. If the board was inclined to take a vote this evening, you know, if not, we could, Dan and I could go back, work on the language, and then bring the document back to the board. We could do it either way.
Yeah. I don't know what Dan's perspective is. I mean, I would probably do similar to 194 if we want to wait and clean it up and see if we can schedule a meeting prior to the July 22nd next ZBA meeting. Do like we did with the 194 and try to schedule an interim meeting sometime either next week or the following week, just to do it, just so we don't delay the process. I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Dan.
Well, yeah, we could close the hearing and just deal with this in deliberation. But I have a feeling you may want to continue participating in the discussion. So I think procedurally it'd be better to keep the hearing open and schedule this for a couple weeks. And I think I don't think you need a vote tonight. Permit. The only question is these loose ends.
Yeah.
That's fine. Yep. We'll tie these up. Ted, does that make sense?
I was actually hoping to get it closed tonight and having you and Dan just work on it, and then have Even if there was no vote tonight, at least close the hearing? Similar to 194?
Well, we actually didn't, Ted, it's actually, the only reason we actually didn't close 194 till we actually had the vote, just in case there was something that was addressed that we needed your input. That was our concern. So it's actually to benefit you to leave it open, but it's up to you and Chris.
Right, what 194 is done. There were no loose ends. So that's why we closed the hearing and took the vote.
I'll defer to Chris.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Dan, boards do it differently. I think if the board wanted to close the public hearing tonight and direct counsel to complete drafting the permit based on the deliberations this evening or consistent with the deliberations this evening, and grant or whatever vote the board might want to take with respect to the permit, again, consistent with what was discussed, then town council and I could go and work on the language, and then the board could review the permit just administratively at the next hearing to, make sure that Dan and I got it right. And I think the point is the public hearing would be closed, but the board could certainly still deliberate, and to the extent they needed input from Shawn, they could still get input from Shawn.
Mr. Chairman, I don't have a problem closing the public hearing tonight.
I guess I'm trying to understand what the pluses of closing the public hearing are versus just leaving it open, because we're going to have a discussion and a deliberation and a vote on it regardless. So what is the advantage of closing the public hearing? I guess that's my question.
At that point, when the public hearing is closed, the board knows that they have received all substantive testimony and comments from third parties, interested individuals, abutters, and whatnot. So we're going to have some public comment tonight. Whenever the chair opens it up to public comment, I think you close the public hearing. It then sets out that, clearly we've received all the evidence, we've heard everything, and that part of the hearing is over. You then could have another hearing to just deliberate and confirm that, the permit that you, and again, that's one thing. You can close the public hearing tonight. You don't necessarily have to have a vote tonight, but what I was suggesting was close the public hearing so that it's clear that the board has received all testimony, all evidence, and that there's no further public comment section of a hearing, so that much is clear. And then the second half of it is, if the board is inclined to vote this evening, whether or not to grant a permit with conditions, they could take a vote to the effect that the board moves, someone moves to grant a comprehensive permit with conditions consistent with the deliberations that have occurred, this evening, and direct town council and the applicant's council to finalize the language for the board's review at the next hearing. And then the board just reviews it and it's done. Versus if we don't close the public hearing, then there is a set aside time period, or, open it up to the public at the next hearing, whenever that is. And there's more back and forth as far as what substantive issues need to be discussed. I think, this evening we hammered out all the substantive issues. I'm looking at my notes, and I think I understand where the board directed us to go with these issues. And I think it's just a matter of, the lawyers need to draft the permit or finish drafting the permit.
I think there are a couple substantive issues we need to iron out, and that's the streetlights. Who's going to be responsible for the drainage basins? So I think these are weighty enough that we keep the hearing open. I don't really see much of an upside to closing it. I think in another context where an applicant's kind of unsure where the board's leaning, I can see why you'd want it. I don't think you have that concern here, and I think that the most cautious course of action if we're going to be getting more information from folks like the DPW director, I'd rather keep the hearing open.
Mr. Chairman, when would the next meeting possibly be? What is the tentative date for the next meeting?
I assume it's, Chris, it must be the 22nd, eh?
It could be before that. We could actually schedule a meeting in between. I think, Amy, we could schedule an interim meeting, couldn't we?
I don't know when you would do it. That week of the 15th, nobody seems to be.
No, not for me. Not for Devin.
I lost Jamie.
Okay, that week that includes Wednesday, the 15th is not good.
What about the week of the
No
8th?
Devin and no Dawn, I think.
Okay, what about the week of the 8th?
Well, on Wednesday, there's a Concom meeting that's pretty heavily loaded, and I should probably be there. I don't know if you want to do a different day of the week.
We could do the 9th if we wanted to.
What happens if I don't make the meeting?
The world will collapse.
No, I meant, the next meeting, I have to be there. I plan on the 22nd. The week of the 6th and the week of the 13th will be very difficult for me,
Okay.
other than a remote phone call.
Yeah.
All right. So from your perspective, it would be the 22nd for you. So in that light of that, what's your thoughts?
I had some interest, Mr. Chairman, on going up to the site and doing some perk tests and some excavations under town review for the 16 single-family lots in the next couple of weeks. That was
You can do that, Ted.
Yeah, you can do that.
There's
Okay.
nothing stopping you from doing that.
okay. So that was my only concern, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. So you'd be okay if we had to go to the 22nd to have our quote vote and deliberation?
Yep.
Well, you do have Abbeville that night.
I know, but I think we're
Yeah,
also gonna do 194, but we're not gonna be long at that point. I think we got a couple of issues, but they should be cleared up by then pretty quickly.
Yep.
Dan, do you agree?
I don't know.
Huh?
And then you'll deliberate both of these?
It seems like a lot for one agenda.
Oh,
Oh, we could do, yeah, you're making it tough.
Dan, we'll be out of your hair in 20 minutes.
The 29th?
No,
29th is fine with me.
Ted, can you go to the 29th if we had to?
Yes.
All right. Dan, does that work for you and Chris?
I'm good.
Okay, so,
By the way,
Oh, I'm sorry, I'm not. Shoot. I guess I could. I'm going to be in New Jersey, but I can do it remotely. So we're still going to be under quarantine, I'm assuming. So.
are you doing a 40B in New Jersey? Sort of a 40B in New Jersey, I assume you're here for us, right? Don, again, back to the question. Do you want to close the public hearing tonight, or do you want to leave it open? What's your flavor?
I guess I have to. I still never really quite understood why or why not, other than I heard that Dan said that he recommends we keep it open, and we're paying him to give us legal advice. So I say leave it open.
Okay, Mike.
Okay, keep it open.
Joe?
Yeah, I'd say keep it open.
All right, so we will keep it open, and we will close it hopefully close it on 29th.
Perfect.
All right. Dan, go ahead, Ted.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate all the work you gentlemen are doing on this. And I do intend to go up in the next week, but I'll notify the building inspector and Rich McCarthy a couple of days in advance. We would like to find out some definitive information on the 16 single-family perk tests. So,
Absolutely.
Ted, do those have to be witnessed by Board of Health?
I believe so, yeah.
All right, so you're gonna do that, right?
Yeah.
Okay, good.
By the way,
Robert.
Ted, I called you Ed before. I apologize.
Not a problem. Yeah, also, I believe someone thought it was Italian, and I just want to clear that up. I'm Irish, not Italian.
Really?
Yeah,
I don't know,
Mr. Quiglieri wanted to know what part of Sicily I was from. I said, I'm not from Sicily.
Is this a plus or a minus?
All right.
That
The
sounds
meeting
like a
is-
minus. I thought he was
Yeah.
Italian.
The meeting
An
is
Irish
over.
Mason. He's an Irish
meeting
Mason. It's
isn't
very
over yet.
confusing.
Still paying the attorneys, so we have to stick to these guys.
Stick
Come
to the
on.
agenda.
Yeah. All right, I think at this time, we can probably open it up to public comment. Amy, do you have some people with some questions?
Frankly, nobody has a hand up. Oh, there we go. Silvana.
Oh.
Silvana Della Camera.
Hello, can you guys hear me?
Yep.
Okay, so I have a question regarding E12, which is the piece regarding the well and the blasting. I have real concerns about the diminished radius that this pertains to. And the reason why is this. Okay, so blasting is, it's basically a human-made earthquake. And earthquakes, by definition, rattle the earth, literally. We in New England know that earthquakes that originate in New Hampshire are felt here. So put that on a very small scale, you still have the ability to affect wells. And the fact that now they diminished it from 1,000 feet to 800 feet, I have real concerns about that, especially having a deep artesian well. When you have blasting, more often than not, the preliminary idea that you're going to have so much blasting occurring, a lot of times it requires a lot more blasting. So where in this language does that cover the extra blasting that now is going to be potentially affecting deeper deeper parts of the ground, and now affecting the abutters wells? I have real concerns about this, and I'm stuttering, and I'm sorry, but I have real issues with this.
Okay. Shawn, do you want to address that as our blasting expert?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to minimize the concerns. What I'm looking for is for the dimension. So the 800 feet at least has a foundation in sort of relevant offsets that DEP applies. They're not exclusive to blasting, but at least we have a basis for the 800 feet. I'm just as comfortable with the 1,000 feet. I don't know if 200 feet is going to make a difference in terms of the sort of the geologic aspects that Silvana mentions. I think the 800 feet in the language that Dan has is pretty compelling. But maybe I'd ask Ted to say, hey, is there somebody within the 800 to 1,000 foot zone, and just maybe consider going back up to 1,000 feet? But I think the 800 feet is a strong requirement. And there are very, very, very tight controls on blasting operations, and it's all approved through the fire chief, and it's got a very, very aggressive survey requirement. So I'm pretty comfortable that the controls are in place to protect everybody in this case.
Well, it's the words are comforting, but sometimes what happens is the reality is far removed from the theoretical. If we look at the plan, where is this blasting actually going to occur?
I don't think they know that yet, Silvana, except for the one area towards the entrance, that they think they might have to do some blasting, but they may be doing chipping.
Okay, again, we're talking theoretical, and, putting language into a document, a legal document that potentially has a negative effect on, people around like us. I have real concerns about that. And in terms of testing, we all know that in the rainy season, in the spring, the water tables are higher. And in the fall, the water tables are lower. So if the blasting occurs, in a high level, or rather the water testing, the pressure testing happens in the spring, or when the water levels are high, then everything's going to be hunky dory. But come, the dry season, when the tables drop, the pressure is no longer going to be at the same level that the original test was. So how does that come in? Is there any language to have two tests to make sure that after the blasting is done, in 6 months' time or 8 months' time, after the initial test, the water, now we don't have the same pressure that we've had consistently for many, many years. How is that going to be mitigated?
Dan, I believe we put in some provision in there to adjust for seasonal fluctuations in water. I thought I had that in there, but
Under water quantity.
yeah. Let me just remember.
Yeah, I don't see it. But is that really?
No, I mean, it's important for people to understand that these are extra controls, Silvana. So, these are controls that don't exist in any sort of water protection regulations or blasting protection. So it's important to understand that everything in the decision is an extra control above what's otherwise required. So there's nothing in here that relieves the applicant of any responsibilities. These are all above and beyond all the other regulations.
And there is actually a provision that if the well owner requests that an additional test would be done 12 months after completion. So I think that addresses the long-term potential impact of blasting on a well that someone may have. And of course, this doesn't eliminate the ability of a well owner to bring their own private cause of action against somebody who's damaging their well. So if you think that somebody blasting on a budding property, whether it's this property owner or anybody, does damage to your well, and you can prove it, then you have your own cause of action against that person. At some point, this is not a board concern. It's more a private property rights concern.
I agree and disagree, Dan. And the reason being that, none of my neighbors are planning any detonations. So the only neighbor that I know that's planning, detonation on a property is at 144 Seekonk Street. So having said that, I think the language is very important to have that, things are covered for the abutters. I mean, I have a 400-foot artesian well, and I'm very concerned about, the explosives affecting my well. So again, 1,000 feet, 1,000 feet from what? I mean, that's a moving target. So you can have your explosive set on one end of the property, and if you're in the prior language of 800 feet, if you're at 850 feet, okay, then I'm SOL for all intents and purposes, even though the explosive action on the property directly affected my well. So, okay, now what do I do when I know that was the reason why my water was affected?
Right, but again, this doesn't prevent you from doing your own baseline tests. You could do, if you're not within the 1,000-foot radius, you could still do your own baseline tests for water quality and water quantity, and then you can do tests after the blasting to determine whether there's been an impact. And if there is, then you have recourse privately against against the developer. And as Shawn said, these are not standard requirements. We actually didn't have this in here before, and we put this in response to specific concerns that were raised. Most zoning decisions don't have this kind of language, and I don't believe the town of Norfolk even has these kind of regulations. There are state regulations, and these go above and beyond the state regulations. So
way beyond them. But that's not being said, the state regulations still tightly control everything related to blasting, but more in the structural sense, in the property damage sense. So, Sylvan, I want you to take some comfort. It's not a bunch of crazy guys up there with sticks of dynamite. It's very, very tightly regulated by the fire chief. It's very scientifically done because the explosives are very expensive. So they don't want to use any more than they have to. The type of blasting that I don't even think they're going to do blasting out here just because it's so, the process of blasting itself is so demanding that I don't know if it's even going to make sense for them to do it, but if they did, we at least have these protections in place. The type of blasting they'd be doing is what's called open face blasting, which requires very small charges because it's open on one side. So it's really just sort of peeling off rock rather than blowing it out of a trench, which is usually more damaging to places around it. So, I hope that gives you some comfort, but this is a really, really onerous set of conditions. And it's something that I've never seen before.
Okay, well, the fact that it went from 1,000 feet to 500 feet really puts the radar up. So, that brings concern.
We're at 800 now. And just to help you understand why the 800. So for me as an engineer, I just want to have some basis for the number that we're applying. And in public water supplies, there's a 400-foot requirement for the area around a well to be protected. So what we're saying is we're gonna double that, what's typical for a public water supply. So if I had a town well, I'd have 400 feet of clear area around it that I have to maintain. What we're saying is we're gonna take a number that's twice that and apply it to this application. I feel stronger as an engineer applying a standard so that we at least have a basis for the number. So if it gets challenged, there's a reason for it.
Okay, so I guess we hope for the best is what I'm being told.
Okay. Other questions, Amy? Anybody else with their hand up?
Yep, Jim Gersha.
Good evening, board. Hi, this is Deborah Gersha. Jim's actually went to sleep already, so I'm speaking on our behalf. I'm also really concerned, just what Silvana mentioned about the private wells. Most of us here on Seekonk Street do have private wells, and there's also quite a large number of people that live in these houses. As you can imagine, these houses have a tendency to be probably a little bit bigger than you would see in places like Dedham or Norwood and Westwood. And because of that, there's quite a number of people who are living in these houses. So the demand for water on people's private wells is actually pretty substantial if you look at the daily need that's needed to run these houses. But yeah, I'm actually having a really hard time with it. Some of the other 40B projects, like we live down the street from Lakeland Farms, and that was pretty much a farm property that's being converted to housing now. And I had the opportunity to walk the site with Mrs. Sweeney and myself. I think it was going back about almost 3 years ago now. And this property is a pretty rugged property, and we probably all know there's quite amount of rock on that property. And yeah, we're just really uncomfortable about the protection of the private wells because, like I said, there's just a lot of water being used between all these houses. And my husband Jim and I have three kids that come and go. My next door neighbors have 3 kids that come and go. The neighbor across the street, they actually have a relative that they basically are letting them use one of the bedrooms. So that whole house is filled up with individuals. Even like another family that's that's diagonal to me, they have 3 children, as a total of family of 5. But yeah, the well issue, E12 is definitely going to be an issue with the folks here. And I don't know, it seems like we're really cutting it close with the amount of footage that's actually even in the draft document now. It seems like it's cutting it really close. But that's one of 2 issues I want to talk about. And thank you for keeping the meeting neat and tidy tonight. I think we're moving ahead really well with the agenda. Going at 12:30 the last time was really tough on the working crowd here in the neighborhood. Okay, thanks for your considerations.
Okay, thank you. Amy, do we have other questions?
I think, well, we did, but yep, Al Quagliari.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question was to Enzo Ohatelli. Does he like his linguine and clams with a white wine sauce or a traditional fra diavolo?
Thank you very much.
I'll allow you to answer, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
Grazie mille. Ciao.
Ciao.
I think it's past your bedtime, Al. Amy, any other questions? Amy, anything else?
Amy?
Yep, that appears to, oh, wait, so I think I just got a question. Sounds like Karen Clark?
Yes, Amy, I'm unable to raise my hand, but I do have some questions.
Okay, here we go.
Mr. Chairman, I have to agree with my neighbors in that I also am quite concerned about my well. We have a lot of money tied up into it. Recently, we installed a new pressure pump, a new pump inside the well, and it would be a great loss if we lost it. I thought the best thing to do under the circumstances was to notify my well company and get their advice. And I explained to the well company that evidently there's only between, if I remember from the past, 8 or 9 wells that could potentially be affected that are abutters. And his recommendation, well, if there's so few wells, why don't they cover all the wells? And I said, well, that's a really good question. They'll put 1,000-foot distance from the location of our wells in the blasting zone. And I agree with my neighbors. I think it's inappropriate. I do believe that it's not fair for the neighbors to have to hire an attorney if something goes wrong with our wells and we're outside of the now 800-foot zone. And again, many of the people this evening, including Shawn, have said the chances are so infrequent. Again, why aren't all the wells being covered by Mr. O'Hart? And so can Mr. O'Hart answer that question, or perhaps his attorney?
I'll allow my attorney to answer that.
If the chairman wants me to answer the question, I mean, I was going to refer back to.
I think Shawn Reardon's, who's our expert and our peer reviewer, has answered the question sufficiently.
Well, I guess I have a question for Shawn then. He's saying that.
Karen, I think we're going to rely on his expert. Karen, I think we're going to rely on Karen. One of us can only talk at a time. I think we're going to rely on our expert, Shawn Reardon's, on this, and that's it. I think end of discussion with regard to the wells and the distance testing. You had some other questions?
This is an important issue, Mr. Chairman. This is our water.
I'm well aware of that, Karen. I think we've addressed it.
Can we at the very least go back to the 1,000 feet as opposed to the 800?
I think Shawn Reardon made it very clear that he's applying engineering standards to this, and that's why he would prefer 800. If Mr. Reardon wants to go back to 1,000 feet, we can certainly entertain that.
Well, my question to Mr. Reardon would be then, is the protective area around the public water supply, does that include blasting around a public water supply, the 400 feet, which he's double?
Yeah, so for example, if the town had to do a sewer project in the street out in front of your house and they had to blast ledge, They wouldn't have to do anything regarding a well. All they'd have to do is to comply with regulations, which is do a structural survey. So these are very, very, very extensive requirements beyond what is currently otherwise required. So, you know, if there was a project just down the street that didn't require a permit from the ZBA, they could blast without any consideration for the wells. So I'm trying to make people feel comfortable that this is a very, very onerous requirement on the applicant, and it provides really, really good protection for those that are close to the blasting.
So Shawn, if we are within these 800 feet, we all can be participants to the well monitoring plan protocol?
Yes, so if let's first of all, Ted has to propose blasting. If he does propose any blasting whatsoever, he's got to notify the fire chief, and he's go through a permitting process to get a blasting permit. And the people that he'd hire to do it are very skilled at blasting. That this is their business, this is all they do. So that will be the trigger. They'll have to do a pre-blast survey, which will identify where all their blasts are going to take place. We'll be able to draw an 800-foot radius around all those locations and identify whoever's within it. According to this permit, Ted will have to go out and sample all the wells within 800 feet of those locations. So there's really good process that supports this condition, and the condition is in my opinion is very, very, very comprehensive.
But if you're beyond 800 feet, Shawn, you wouldn't be included in the testing of the water.
If you're by virtue of this condition, if you're 803 feet from the proposed blast locations, you would not be subject to this condition.
Okay. Couple of other questions I have for the chairman. Condition A2 that addresses that no vehicular access to the other land. The roadway shown on 44 unit plan shall never serve any uses other than 44 housing units shown on the plan and uses accessory thereto. I do believe the original request was for a right-of-way for an easement. And I believe that this language should include that no right-of-way or easement will be permitted that accesses any of the abutting properties to the project.
Dan, do you want to take that? I assume she's referring to the right of way to Mr. O'Hart's daughter's property. Is that correct?
You're correct, Mr. Chairman, yes.
I think that came out. What condition are you looking at?
Is condition A2, Dan?
A2. Okay. Yeah, we took that driveway out. I think the applicant told us he didn't need it anymore.
Well, I think it's worded that it's not to be used for vehicular access to any other land.
Right.
But what the request actually was for an easement and a right of way. So I think it's important to include that language in A2 that there is to be no right of way or easement to any abutting property to prevent that in the future.
Mr. Chairman, if I may answer, that easement has been removed. It's no longer any easement.
The permit conditions, and there are actually two other documents that prevent any access to abutting properties, Karen.
I think the language of A2 covers that. It says that the roadway shown on the plan shall never serve any uses other than the 44 housing units.
Okay, I just want to confirm that.
Yeah, that's our intent. We purposely drafted it this way so there would not be any extensions of this road into abutting property.
That's correct, yes.
I appreciate that. And now just to get down to A5, proposed no build, no disturbed district. Evidently the applicant, did you have time to get there?
Yep, we're here.
Okay. Evidently the applicant is providing a buffer in parcel C abutting 14 Stop River Road.
Right.
There's a large treed area is shown on the plans behind 130 and 134 Seccong Street, but it is not classified as a no build, no disturb area. And I'm wondering why.
This was something the applicant agreed to do on its own with respect to a neighbor. And the applicant and the neighbor asked us to incorporate their agreement as a condition. So this wasn't actually something the board asked for. This is something that a specific neighbor had worked out with the developer directly.
Okay, well, then I would make a request to the developer to make the area behind 130 and 134 Seekonk Street a no build, no disturbance area. There's a steep grade behind those two properties. And if the area is cleared or disturbed, erosion and instability potentially can occur. So both the residents, myself and my neighbor at 134 would like to request that the applicant make those areas a no build, no disturb.
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead, Mr. Attorney Agostino.
So the reason that area was identified as no build, no disturb is because it was proximate to a house, a dwelling. The area you're describing slopes down towards the development property, and there's no house that's nearby that. So it's not as compelling to get into a discussion about, you know, changing plans or redrafting permits or doing anything. I mean, we're showing the plan with the houses where they are. And the only reason there was special treatment for that corner was because it was the one house that would actually have some effect, you know, that could potentially be affected by the development. So that's why we did that. And I don't think the areas you described fit that same set of circumstances.
I think we also had some concerns with regard to a vernal pool on that individual's property and their septic system being down gradient of the development. So I don't think this condition occurs on these two parcels. Karen.
So can we assume, based on these plans with the trees written in, that area will remain treed?
Mr. Chairman, if I may answer, that is the general intention, to keep it as it's shown on this concept plan.
Again, because at a past meeting, I believe it was Devin who mentioned that there's quite the steep behind 130. And at one time, I think there was an enormous wall proposed for behind the house at the property line. And I know now the walls have been decreased to 6 feet, but again, you know, we're concerned that if you cut tight into that property, we're going to have some instability with that steep hill behind the house.
Mr. Chairman, if I may answer, I believe Mrs. Clark might be referencing when we had the 84 homes and the site was a lot tighter. And now with the 44 homes, there's much more space. And we're expecting this configuration, this concept to be true to form with this tree coverage staying undisturbed.
Okay, I'll take you for your word, Mr. O'Hart. Under B17, general conditions, it prevents units from being converted to rental units, but the second half of that sentence leaves the door open for the board, for them to become rental units with an approval of substantial modification from the board. That's a concern. The second sentence permits homeowners to rent homes. What would prevent an investor from buying multiple condos and renting them, turning the residential property into a rental area?
Dan, do you want to tackle that?
What condition is this again?
This is B17, I believe, Dan. I don't have the updated conditions. I'm
B
based.
is in boy.
C1, Dan. C1, Charlie 1.
It's under general conditions.
Okay. So this C1 prohibits a conversion of rental units without approval from the zoning board.
Correct.
And there's an exception for short-term, renting, except not Airbnb. So what was your concern, or what was your question?
So the concern is that it looks like the units can become rental units if the board gives approval through a substantial modification from the ZBA. And my other concern is if a developer came in or a investor came in and bought 3 or 4 units, what is to prevent them from renting the units as opposed to being the homeowners of the units and living there?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So so the first question or the first comment is that yes, the applicant or the successor developer could come in and ask for a change, but they can do that anyway. Even if this condition wasn't here, developers have the right to request the zoning board to change the project from ownership to rental. And that's just the nature of 40B, that's allowed. This condition would prohibit rentals. So they'd have to request a substantial modification. If even if someone bought 2 or 3 units and decided to rent them, that would not be allowed.
That's not true, Dan.
Yeah, I think it says they can rent it for 3 months or over, Dan.
That's not true. There's a difference between a development. Actually, Karen, just to cut to the chase as far as the answer, there's nothing to prevent what you're concerned about as far as rentals. So if for whatever reason the applicant decided that the project should be a rental project as a whole, so that the entire development is going to be a 40B rental development. Now, as a practical matter, that's not going to happen. I mean, this site is situated so that it's geared toward for sale housing, and the 44 units is geared toward for sale housing. So there's no real concern about doing the amendment to convert the entire project to a rental development. But there's no restriction for a homeowner to rent out the house for greater than 3 months to a third party that is looking to rent a house in Norfolk. If you wanted to rent your house in Norfolk, just like Ted rents his house from his daughter, you can rent your house to a third party that just wants to rent. There's nothing in the law that would prevent that arrangement. There's no regulation or theory, absent something in a homeowners association agreement, which we wouldn't impose in this context, but there's nothing to prevent that. And it shouldn't be prevented because there are people out there that might want to rent a house.
Well, in response to that, I do believe that various condo associations have the right to put something in their conditions to prevent rentals. So
generally, they prevent short-term Airbnb rentals, but there are very few that say you cannot, across the board, rent your property. A lot of them include a condition like this, which says 3 months or longer. That's a fair condition because you don't want 1 month rentals here and there or seasonal rentals. But if somebody wants to do it on an annual basis, that's appropriate. So I think what's written here is consistent with what you'd expect to see for a development like this.
Okay. All right. I appreciate the answers. Thank you.
Karen, Amy, do we have anybody else with any questions?
I don't see anybody.
Okay, great. Chris, anything further?
No, I think that's it.
Okay, Dan?
No, I'm good.
Okay, so I guess could I get a motion to continue the public hearing until July 29th? We're late.
I so move.
I'll
You have
second.
a second. Discussion. Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, good.
A quick note from me. Chris, could I get an extension letter, please? Chris Agostino?
I'll take care.
Actually, you don't need one because you're under no penalty of law during the COVID crisis right now. So we can certainly sign one if you'd like, but we're all, proceeding in good faith to get this done.
Yep. Okay, well, of course, I'll leave that up to the board and Dan.
Dan, you're all set with that?
Why don't you just give us one anyway?
Sure, why not? One more piece of paper.
One more,
You get paid by the word.
one more bill.
One more bill.
Oh.
All right, do I have a motion to close the zoning board of appeals meeting at 10:08 on July 1st?
So moved.
Second? Do we have second?
Can I second that?
I'll second it.
Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you very much. Have a good evening, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Night,
Thank
everybody.
you, gentlemen.
Right.